Hi, this is Paul. Luke had a good live stream this morning. I thought it was a good topic, and he treated a little bit earlier Mark Lefebur's conversation with Matthew Pajot, and then he dipped into this video that he found in my radio live stream. Now, I thought I was going to probably take it down today or do something else with it, but that didn't happen because I just haven't had enough time. I visited Freddie. Sometimes when I visit Freddie, it's a long visit because he doesn't want me to leave. And sometimes when I visit Freddie, it's a short visit because he wants to kick me out right away. Well, today was a long visit, so I haven't had much time to do much, but I'm going to incorporate a bunch of things that happened today because they all sort of clustered around the question of what role does the internet play, or what role should the internet play in our world and in our life and in the church and in the Christian church. I had a big conversation this morning with Annie Crawford, and that's currently in No Wait, No Ads, and it will come out within a week or so. So I'm traveling next week, so sometimes I buffer some of these and hold some of these for a little while to come. But I will be playing a pretty sizable clip of this conversation a little bit later in this video, along with some other things. I also had when I was driving to Freddie's, I had a conversation with Chad on the phone. Chad deleted his channel, the Friday Morning Nameless, and that, of course, caused quite a bit of interest and stir. Why would he do that? It didn't surprise me. Chad has done versions of this before, and Chad, I told Chad, I said, it's absolutely okay to delete your channel on YouTube. That is absolutely fine. You have to make a decision about the best way to deal with the internet in your life right now, and if deleting your channel is best, then delete your channel by all means. It's just a channel. That's all it is. And then one of the things that it was interesting because how many things sort of crossed my conversations at different aspects today, which isn't, of course, unreasonable. But the goal is, this is one of the things I said to Annie. I said, the goal is to produce Christians, not to produce YouTubers or pastors. Now, we need YouTubers and we need pastors and we need people who do different things, but the goal of the Christian life is to create godly people who are pastors and accountants and electricians and tilers, and the goal of the internet and the goal of everything we do on the internet should be to produce the best people. The internet should facilitate that. And this is different from the goal of YouTube, which is to have us all watching YouTube 24/7 every day of the week. That is the goal of the machine. That is the goal of YouTube, but it's not the goal of us. And so one of the frequent topics, and so then I wrestle with this channel, which is a 24/7 channel. And what I like about this is basically it's become a tool for me to go back and see other conversations. And Pseudo Boethius really jumped in on this conversation and really enjoyed it. Jem, I had two conversations with Jem back in the day, which I really enjoyed, but I haven't seen him for a long time. Now, some of that could just be internet churn, that he sort of moves away and goes someplace else, which is fine. Or part of that could be he got from the corner or from my conversation or from Jordan Peterson or from whatever he needed to actually hopefully go on in life and go on to bigger and better things. And I caught a snippet of my conversation with Brett Sockold, and that was, he made a point there. It's like, oh yeah, he made that point. That point is so true. How this whole question of the Eucharist came up, centuries after the church had been doing it and doing it. Is it? And I forget exactly how he did it. So then it was like, boy, I want to go back and I want to rewatch that thing again because there was so much good stuff in it. Or maybe I'll clip it and then Poe the person, and it's like, oh yeah, Poe the person, and Tayo was in the chat, and he said, did she ask him the question yet? And I thought, what question did she ask me? And Tayo was like, do you think I'm a Christian? It's like, oh, that's right, she asked me that question, and I haven't had time today to go back and find these files and clip out, and maybe that will happen in the future. I don't know. And in some ways, it doesn't matter, but it's all resources. And then someone was watching Job, and it was like, oh, yeah. Well, and people who hadn't listened to Job at all, they're like, this guy's really funny to watch. He's really entertaining. But Job, and then I think Sam has already been released. There was an early conversation with John Vervaeke, and then wonderful conversation with Jonathan Peugeot when he was in the place that he was living because his own house got flooded out. And again, for me, this is much more personal because I was obviously here for all of this, and some of it I remember better than I do in other places, and currently is my conversation with John Sook. But this came up, not that one. This one. This came up in Luke's video where he bumped into that, and here's young Sam. And I had completely forgotten about this video. And Luke said, I looked for this video and I can't find it on your channel. And I thought, I was posting so many videos back then. It could be that I never posted this video at all. This was a really critical stage in the development of Estuary. This is before Thunder Bay. It was after I had announced Estuary. It was after, we had developed the protocol, but this was August of 2020, and we were really wrestling with how is the internet going to serve this fledgling community that has just started. And we'll just play a little bit of what Luke found with Luke's commentary.
Incarnate, it's embodied.
And that is limited. And if we try and accelerate faster than that, then we will be turning into something that we aren't currently now, right? Instead of spreading what we currently aren't now. And so but if we don't grow, then we'll become decadent, and slowly people drift away and sort of will be stuck with the hardest core of the hardest core. And that's not really even what the hardcore want anyway. And so that's what I'm saying. And I feel like when I've been hearing you talk about that, Shrey, it sounds more Sacramento-centric than what I...
Okay, now that's old. I mean, that's basically the clip.
Okay, so, but one of the things that Sam had noticed is that one of my principles with small group is, I get this actually from the Serendipity small group things, is the open chair. Because Sam is exactly right, because when you sort of close it, it does become decadent. And then you just get down. I've seen a lot of churches when they get down to the viability stage. Now, Livingstone's isn't this way right now, I think, for a whole variety of reasons. But many churches, right before they close, get down to like the hardest nut. They're the most disagreeable, they're the most conservative, and they're just temperamentally, they're just the last dog that decides to die. And I didn't want groups like that. And so I'm going to take that whole video and append that to the end of this video. So this video is going to look very long because that video was like 1 hour and 47 minutes. And I've got a sizable chunk of my conversation with Annie Crawford. I'm going to put that in here. And I've got a piece from John here. But Nico in the, I don't, let's see, here it is. Man, the stuff just keeps going and going. We never seem to arrive anywhere. And that's been a common thing that we've heard pretty much right from the start. And what was interesting is that I thought part of that is that dynamic between real life and the internet. Now, you watch me and you think you know me because, well, here's my office and here I am, and you hear me and I tell a lot of stories and blah, 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 blah. But you know the profilicity of me, you know this piece of me, but there's way more pieces of me that this won't capture. And, it really got me thinking about the fact that so much has changed. And, we just had Midwestuary, we just had Southwestuary, we have estuary groups all over the world. Estuary is probably going to go into a Zoom thing so that it can reach more regions. Many people are now in church. So it's a really difficult thing to get a handle on the question, what is the internet for? how is it useful, when to use it, when to not use it, what do we do with this thing? And, we have very similar questions with respect to AI. Again, I was in the nursing home where Freddie is right now and visiting him and talking. And then I came back and we had one of our elders here and another person here, and they're getting ready for this garage sale that we're going to have at the end of the week, just to clear out stuff out of the room. So the next weekend we can do some work in some of those rooms. And so I was talking about some of the members of my church that are now in nursing facilities, memory care facilities. They've been disabled by stroke, et cetera, and just the difficulty of keeping those people's minds in some way engaged, and how hard that is on, let's say, nursing home staff. Because often you go into either a nursing home is just, you see everybody running around, or if it's like, say, a small group home, then you just see whatever the care worker is there, she's just sitting on her phone scrolling. So you get the people sort of vegetating. They put on daytime TV, whether the people themselves in their life have been all interested in that TV, and then they're just sitting there scrolling. And because, I visit the people of this church that are in nursing facilities, this is what you see. And, the response to the video I released this morning was, "Oh, you sound depressed." I'm not depressed at all. The state of this stuff is quite depressing. I'm not depressed at all. It often makes me thoughtful and poignant when I think about the way the world is. And to go to Freddie's home, I've got to drive down Florin Road, and it's sort of the gauntlet of drug dealers and homeless people and people pushing carts. And I mean, it's a pretty sketchy area, and they're building a new apartment. So I'm just processing all of this, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to visit Freddie. And actually we had a good day today. He wanted to visit, and he was walking around, which is, he needs to be walking around, and he was hungry. He needs to be hungry, and they haven't put him on solid food yet. And so I cornered a couple of the nurses, says, get him that swallow test and get him moving. Because part of the problem with nursing homes is that a patient like Freddie is a pain in the neck. And when you have a patient who's a pain in the neck, you avoid him. But he needs to, I think he's going to get out of that nursing home, and we're going to have the Freddie and Paul show again. And, but it's a lot. And anyway, so, and then Luke had on Twitter, he had this with John Hears, and I didn't know who the other guy was. "How is the advice of going to another parish, not Protestant, but going online for another data point is?" And so, this sounds interesting. So I haven't listened to the whole video, but I've listened to a fair amount of it, and I've clipped some of it because it's a super interesting question that they're dealing with. And it's the same question that Luke was dealing with on his live stream this morning. And I'll put the link to that below, and I'll put the link to this video below, and I'll put the Annie Crawford is still in No Wait, No Ads, but the link to that will be below, because once it's out of No Wait, No Ads, then if you find this video, you can find that video. And then I will, at the end of this video, I'm just going to play the whole Sam and my conversation from August 2020. So in August 2020, we were going to originally have the original Thunder Bay conference in September of 2020, but that whole thing got postponed because of COVID. And now in COVID, we're trying to figure out what happens to Estuary. How does this work? Because COVID starts in March of 2020. And that's when we're still doing the Jordan Peterson meetups, and we're doing this West Coast tour with Job. And then by August of 2020, we had already basically transitioned over to Estuary, even though we couldn't do much for in-person meetings. So that's the timeline of that. But let's first take a look at this clip.
Well, help me out with this. This is a thought I just had. So you and I, let's say, sensed the hot boiling water 30 years ago. I'm going to go with that. And I do think all of this corresponds with the notion of conversion. So I think when anyone converts, a Hindu or whoever, something wakes up in them, and it's not always toward Christ and truth, perhaps, but it's a waking up. And I think the waking up that you and I went through was to, of course, to realize the resurrected Christ, but also to say like, oh, there's an accompanying idea on the darker side of the machine. So I woke up to that. So did you. I think that's why you're here with all this great internet content. Because one thing about you have great internet content. So, but work with me for a second. So Gadfly Academy, and for Heavy Things Lightly, this podcast, we're sitting around doing wake up conversations. Let's call them that. Let's just call them like, oh, see what's happening? Variations on that. And then some young guy somewhere, some woman somewhere, they wake up. So this is my question for you, but for me too, and all of us. When they wake up, they're not tidy people. They're not tidy. They're waking up with thistles and thorns and all kinds of ideas, and also beautiful ideas of, oh my God, like that's so amazing. I have a friend who always says, I thought America was the hero of the story. And now I realize, wait a minute, it's the Gollum. And he screams it. And he's like, so I love American servicemen, but they have to stop going out with guns. Like he's freaking out. And he's a human and he's young. And you know where he's walking into? A church. And you did that. I could argue you, Gadfly guy, did that. You brought him with all of his irritations into the church. And so when you do that, like, I just think it's going to be messy. I don't really care that it's messy, but
yeah,
I see your point.
So what I tell people is, once you've found the church, stay offline. Like you don't need to be online anymore. You have a priest, you have a liturgical community. Be obedient. If your priest suggests some online resources, great. But otherwise, like the point of online is to help people find the church and should not be, I think, a catechetical place. I mean, if you're in the outback, in Australia, I think there was one commenter on one of my videos who said, thank you for your content because we're in the middle of nowhere and you are our entry point into Orthodoxy and we don't have a church. That's a rare situation, but I think for most people, like online should be where they find Orthodoxy, and then once they become Orthodox or go to an Orthodox church, it's at that point where online becomes can be divisive, and
I see. Yeah, I see. In some ways, then it's like you have what you need because you have the community, you have the communion, you have confession, you have a priest. But you know what? Maybe the machine has taught us also to trust itself, like to trust the data as it floats around. We get into habits of mining the data, right? So you're saying something like when you find the parish, break your habit, Mr. Untidy, wake up person. Like,
absolutely.
Break the habit, bro.
I mean, that's, Kings North and others, encourage the destruction of, one smartphone or the, moving away, so what is the solution moving forward? You're right. Like one has, in myself, firstly, these addictions, and so the path forward again is to go back to something simpler, and it begins inside of oneself and making different choices and living differently, looking for like-minded people, looking for community, and looking at one's values and asking oneself if one's living one's life according to them. And if you're not, then
it's tricky, man. And yeah, we can, I got one last question for you. after our unique second try, when I hit record, and then the demons came and kept hitting unrecord. This is like our third, but for people who are watching this, we've recorded like 3 recordings today. But you know what, Herman? We're getting it done. Just to take this one step further, there is this thing with the conscience. I was a new convert. I was in a parish, but something was off. This is the problem, right? Something was off, especially when they tried to ordain me. When no one told, they were like, "We want you to be a priest." At a meeting where they had already asked, it was a crazy moment in my life. I had no intention of ever doing any of that, but no one had asked me. And I was like, something's wrong here, and I started to realize what it was. And then eventually, I had to leave. But a lot of what I realized came from me surfing the interwebs. Like something was not right with that situation. But I was helped online. Father Josiah was one of the people that helped me. And I just wonder, like, I get what you're trying to do. I really do. You're trying to honor the role of the parish in your life, and especially of the priest, the pastoral leader. It's tough though, man. Because there's moments when you just know something's not right.
I guess the question is, you know, if you're in that situation, you know, think back 50 years ago, what would I have done if I didn't have technology in this situation? If you have an intuition that something's off, then you go and you look for another parish. You go and look for other data points. Yeah. But going online, I mean, part of the problem with going online is that you become you begin that way. Obviously, in a sense, one comes to Orthodoxy and one is a Protestant. You know, one has not submitted oneself to the church yet. But until you do that, until you submit yourself to a particular community, you are, you know, just a Protestant. You are making your own decisions based on your own, you know, yes, you have conscience, and that's helpful. It'll keep you from certain things. But as far as, you know, there's a lot more than just, the kind of things that, that conscience is going to guide you to.
Yeah, there's obedience. Yeah, there's obedience, which is a hard thing for Westerners. Yeah, I always say, I don't think it's a moral decision to leave a certain parish. I don't believe that. I think it's a hard decision, and often you get it wrong to stay or to leave. But I don't think it's like moral. I don't think you're doing something immoral. I mean, there's one chalice. We know this, that iconographically, there's just one chalice. You're not really going to a different church in that sense. I don't know. And it's very funny because in Georgia, it's very unique. But you see what a state church looks like. I keep asking people about their parish, and they'll be like, well, I go over here, and then, or I'll go over here. They move around in Tbilisi. And they also, sometimes they'll move around because they'll be like, I love these chanters. But it's not like a bad, no one would go like, oh my gosh. Like, why did you do that? Wasn't your priest upset? But it's different, right? And so part of the parish concept is an inherited Protestantism itself. See what I'm saying? Some of that is we've inherited the Protestant idea of the parish, of the independence of the pastor. Some of it. And you can see it in Georgia. That's not the issue. The issue would be if you're not preparing yourself for confession, but through confession, and then who's your confessor? And then you start to realize, oh, it's way laid back, like as per parishes. For better or worse, that's in my blood. I see that when I'm in Georgia. So I don't know. I think it's so messy that mostly we have to be really kind to one another. Because most of us don't know how this should be, because it's so odd in history, this internet stuff.
And I guess a question I would ask about, the situation in Georgia, because obviously I lived in Greece as well, and it's kind of similar. But the question is, is the way it is in, 21st century Georgia and Greece, is that what it would have looked like 500 years ago?
Yeah.
Or is it, right? Because they didn't have a state-sponsored church. It wasn't like, in certain places they were probably historically. I don't know, what it looked like in Byzantium. But we do call the priest father, and he does have a flock, and it's not like an invisible flock. We don't believe in a invisible church. So there is something about like a local relationship, and I think that there is a commitment, a responsibility that one has. If everybody just flocked to to a certain parish because they liked the certain preacher or the certain chanter, to me that sounds way more Protestant. So there's freedom in Orthodoxy. Obviously, we very much believe in the importance, centrality of free will, and so no one is forced. But I think there is a responsibility, and as long as everything's done in love, I think that's the main thing that's done. Things are done peacefully according to order.
I agree.
Now, I found that to be a super interesting clip. If you go back and you look at one of my conversations with a friend who's an Orthodox priest out of New York City, I mean, he basically told me when I was hanging with him at ARC, he was basically saying, yeah, once I get a catechumen in, it's like, stop watching Orthodox YouTube. And this guy's sort of like, once you're in the church, stop watching the internet. And it's like, really? How's that going to go? And the questions here. So one of the videos that I was watching was Nick, who had been in all of these cults. And there's another great clip. And I thought, boy, I'm finding so much of this old content really stimulating that it's like I just want to go back and rewatch all this stuff and rehash it, because on one hand it's giving me perspective, because I can see, oh yeah, this was what we were wrestling with in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. I have videos up to 2021 now in this little stack. This is John Sook. He was editor of the Banner. He had basically climbed to the top of the CRC hierarchy and then sort of didn't really sort of deconstructed and became a United Church of Canada priest who was sort of a weak theist at best, almost an atheist. And so I actually rented from him in seminary. He owned a house, and I lived downstairs with a buddy of mine, and he and his wife lived upstairs. So I wanted to talk about him, about that journey, and he wrote a book about it, and he had done all those things, and all these videos. I think all these videos. Now that Luke said that thing about the Sam video, and I couldn't easily find it right now, so I'm like, how much new content is in this stuff that I'm finding? Now I was very careful not to include conversations from people that said they didn't want it shared. So I'm pretty sure about that. But the fact that Sam conversation probably never got posted, well, that's super interesting. So, but the question of the role of the internet, and in some ways, is it that much different from churches? There was a kid in my Christian school who was part of a more conservative Reformed denomination, and they didn't have a television. And I remember growing up, it was like, why doesn't that kid have a television? But the kid read a lot of books because, he didn't have a television. So he just read a lot of books. And so it was like, wow. But, couldn't talk to him about Happy Days or any of the things that we were watching on TV. And so it's going to be super interesting. Again, thinking back to this conversation that happened at Southeastuary with respect to technology. Are we really just going to kind of split as a society between internet people and non-internet people, screen people and non-screen people? Now, my conversation with Annie today went great, and I wasn't in any way surprised by that. In fact, there's a lot of parallels between the life of Annie and her husband and the life of me and my wife in terms of homeschooling, and there's a lot of parallels in there. So it was really a lot of fun talking to her. And so one of the things I was really curious about was her church journey, because as I said in the video, and as her story reflects, because I'd noticed things, because I mostly sort of followed her on Twitter, and I'd noticed that on one hand, okay, she's done courses for the symbolic world. She's very much sort of in the symbolic world camp, but she hasn't gone Orthodox and she hasn't gone Roman Catholic. She's Anglican. And, and part of the reality, whereas part of the distortion of the internet is like, I've done X, so you can do that too. And it's like, well, that depends on, does that work for your marriage? Does it work for your children? Does it work in your locale? Does it work in your zip code? Because the strange thing about the internet is it's like everywhere. It's just hovering above the world. What's her name? Kathleen D. article about the internet as ether. That was a really good Substack. She's a really good Substacker. So, the part that I'm going to play, it's a pretty substantial clip. It comes later in the episode where she's pretty much told her story. And now we're sort of talking church, and, we talk about the internet. And part of this wrestling is the internet has done some really cool things. And part of the point she makes is that for someone who is a stay-at-home mom, a homeschooling mom, the internet can be a huge relief, because part of what happens in the house is all this isolation, and it relieves the isolation. And I was talking with Chad about that today too, and it's now we have this really powerful tool, and we have to figure out how to use it responsibly, how to use it for good. And in many ways I feel similar things about AI. I think there's going to be some really good things that come of AI, and then there are certain things I can now do with AI. I don't relate to it or chat with it, but, someone mentioned recently that Gemini, which is owned by Google, is a much better YouTube search engine than the little search strip on the top of YouTube. And he was right. I can much more easily find not only my videos, but other videos by being more specific. So AI isn't going away, and it's going to be an incredibly powerful tool. And I was, again, I'm still playing with this 24/7 stream to see what happens with it, because and that's part of it doesn't cost me a lot in that, there's a little bit of electricity going on to keep it there, but it's helping me find old content, and but it's at the same time changing me. Is it changing me in a good way? I don't know. So here's some of my conversation with Annie about, wrestling with some of these same issues with the internet.
We're now trying to plant an Anglican church in Southwest Austin. And part of that, I think, is because it became a destination church in downtown Austin that got more and more self-conscious about being cool. Austin's just a very self-consciously cool. And that's not a robust spiritual value, actually.
You're right. It is not.
Right. And I think some of my experience, right, is I know the stakes that we're playing with. I've experienced the stakes we're playing with.
Yeah.
A family that falls apart, a life that falls apart. And so I'm always very conscious of and then being philosophically minded of I see where this leads.
Yeah.
I see where this leads. We need to regroup here and stay strong. And I just felt like I was fighting the drift.
Yeah.
So we've stayed Anglican, but in that moment, that's when everyone's thinking about, well, what is the right church, the true church that can hold its ground strong against the storm? right? As the cultural storm, we really are
Yeah.
going through this transitional period, right? We're feeling it this week right now with the new Groiper attack. It's just crazy out there.
Yeah.
It's the old world is dying, the new
Yep.
world's being built. It's
Yep.
very messy.
Yep.
And a lot of us have tenuous roots, right? And so how do we root in deep? It's the trees with strong, deep roots that are
Yeah.
able to buffer the storm and not fall
Yeah.
over. And so
Yeah.
where's the church? Where's the community with the strong, deep roots? And that's where I think Catholicism and Orthodox have very strong pull, because they are stinking, they're old. They're very
Yeah.
old. They've weathered several seasons of turnover.
Yep.
Several
Yep.
eras, right? The rise and fall of many worlds that they have endured. And so there's a real temptation to look to move that direction. But I just felt like I was circling.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I'm glad you've seen What About Bob? When What About Bob
Many
is trying to get
times
on,
my kids loved it.
right? When he's trying to get on the elevator, right? And he just like keeps circling, he like tries to get on, he's like, he like circles again. Like, this is me, like thinking about the elevator of Catholicism or Orthodoxy, and like just can't quite do it, right? And just keep never
Yeah.
having peace. And finally, the Lord has brought me to a place of like, lean not on in your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge me, and I will direct your paths. I will tell you when you need to go, if you need to go.
Yep. Yep.
Right now I have you here.
Yep.
And in Anglicanism, there really is, it is an integrate. I know I sit at an intersection in terms of my personality and my gifting and my story. And Anglicanism also sits in many ways at an intersection of evangelical, reformed, but also liturgical and symbolic, and that God has me here for a reason, and it suits well the work that I've been given to do.
Yep.
And then to what you're saying about the Dutch heritage, I think there's something too. Okay, we're trying to find roots. Well, I'm very Anglo-Saxon. Now, for a little while, I thought I was Welsh. Do you know this story? I was like, I think my family crest is Welsh. And so I'm going over to England and I'm going to look it up, and I'm like, it's not Welsh, it's Anglo-Saxon. Richard Willen's like, well, I could have told you that after looking at you for 5 seconds. Your face is obviously Anglo-Saxon. So Anglo-Saxon about my face. Anyway, so apparently I'm Anglo-Saxon, both in looks and deed. There's roots there.
Yep.
I'm Anglican.
Yeah.
There's a heritage there.
Yeah.
I love English literature.
Yeah.
I teach English literature.
Yeah.
And so kind of just rooting where I'm, this is where I am. I'm going to be where I'm planted. If the Lord wants me to journey on, I'm very open to him telling me, what to do next. So that's kind of how I'm just still sitting here in Anglicanism. And I do think in that way, I hope someone who can help create fruitful conversations between many, many Catholic friends that I love and do a lot of work with, and many Orthodox friends that I love and do a lot of work with, and many evangelical friends that I love and do a lot of work with. And, we just have bigger fish to fry in
Yeah.
our interdenominational debate. So the one thing that I will stand strong on is the sacramental worldview. I really think that is essential to a healthy Christianity. And so where I find I'm not able to work well with people is when they want to cling to a kind of dualism. And usually I find that it's fear of what the implications are for women. Well, if my body has symbolic meaning that in any kind of way exercises authority over me, I don't like that. That's usually when I'm like digging into like, what's wrong with the sacramental worldview? Well, it will lead to some kind of misogyny.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I could see that. Well, our culture, I'm reading a book by Christopher Clark, really enjoying it, on the revolutions of 1848. And I'm in the second chapter now, these huge chapters. But it's fascinating in the run-up to all of these, and in these revolutions that sort of sweep Europe in 1848 and 1849. It really transforms the continent in a lot of ways. Um, Many of the ideas that we're dealing with today, they're just sort of emerging there.
Mhm.
And he's reading some people from that period. It's like, wow, could have heard this in the 60s and 70s, could have this heard this at the height of wokeism. It's just all these ideas just reemerging, and a lot of them have to do, I think this is part of the reason Mary Harrington is so helpful. A lot of
Mhm.
them have to do with the way that industrialization really sort of rips apart the pastoral world in which sexual complementarity in some ways sort of fell on much more natural, inevitable lines, and we're in this strange world now where we don't quite the mappings, the masculine
Yeah.
and feminine mappings aren't nearly so obvious, and therefore, there's just a lot more chaos going on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's right. Nancy Piercy, I got to study with her at HCU, and she talks about this a lot. That was really helpful for me to
yeah,
realize the way that, yeah, industrialization shifted the way that we lived together.
yeah,
And really just meant that women were abandoned in a home where nothing was happening,
yeah,
which isn't the way the world worked
no,
at all
no,
before industrialization. So what rather than deny that men and women are different, we just have to renegotiate how to recover our a kind of wholesome, I'll use the word wholesome, complementarity in a new
yeah,
context.
yeah, yeah,
And I do think that's where, for me, the internet has helped because it's brought activity back into the home. So the first
yeah,
step for me was
yeah,
homeschooling. Well, this is this is a job that uses my creativity and my intelligence. And for a while I ran a blog called Chief Executive Mom. So I was going to take that like type A part of me that was,
yeah,
um, that love to get good grades and prove myself that way, but try to redeem it and sanctify it and direct it in a new way. And so, I thought, chief executive mom. Okay, well, if I was out there, as I thought I would be as a career woman, making her own way, climbing to the top of whatever ladder, all the excellence and energy that I would have given that job, why don't I give this job?
yeah.
Like this job seems
That's
important,
poured into those
right?
little girls.
Yeah, but and building a family
Yeah,
culture, right?
yeah,
And so building a family culture, building a community, a neighborly community, raising my girls. And so for a while, that blog, gave me a way to process that and think about that and formulate how I was going to approach that
yeah,
for a little while. And so the internet has this is a topic that comes up in this little corner, right? Is that we all see the bad side of social media and the bad side of the internet and the way that it really can cause problems, but we have to hold that intention with the good that it's done.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, it's enabled me to be really happy in a home-based life
yeah,
because I'm not so isolated, and my active lively mind has some way of engaging the world,
mhm,
right? And that's enabled us to renegotiate, what I feel like in our family is healthy gender roles and balance. And so I'm thankful for that, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then, well, the whole ministry you have is
yeah,
possible because of that. And so it's really
yeah,
about recognizing the strengths and the weaknesses and being people with enough virtues to navigate those well rather than just throwing it all away.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have a much clearer picture of you now, and I intentionally want to give you time for questions that you might have, but I really appreciate you telling your story. And so, again, for those who aren't as familiar with my channel, right now, actually, I'm always playing with things. So I'm playing around with a 24/7 live stream of just like all old randos conversations. And right now, there are 8 people watching that, or including this monitor that's on it. I'm not really watching. I don't know how many of those other people just have it running on something either. But part of the reason that I've done this is, I grew into this thing accidentally. And what I knew how to do in terms of dealing with the river of people who began to come to me once I started making videos about Jordan Peterson's biblical series was basically what I do as a pastor, which is, well, who are you? How can I figure out who you are? And so then I have hundreds of videos of people who found me, who had also, in many cases, found Jordan Peterson or some other thing that I had been touching on at some point, and and I get them, just like we've sort of done with you today, to tell their story. And what has happened in there is that what people will find is that while your story is unique, there's all these little elements of your story that they can sort of,
Mhm.
connect to and say, oh, yeah. And she did it this way, or she learned this, and that led here. And but for me, this was there here. And so, and in many ways, that's, as you're thinking about church planting, I was quite
Mm.
involved with church planting for my first 15 years here in Sacramento. Um, one of the things, one of the real challenges with a church plant, especially if you have like if the things that church plants really want, which is something attractional, which will sort of
Mhm.
attract a critical mass, because you kind of do need a critical mass for a whole variety of reasons. But that attractional, once you've got to knit that to actually have it become a church and not just an audience, you need a
Mhm.
way for the people to begin to knit together with their lives.
Mhm.
So, and that then becomes a real church because it's a community.
Mhm.
So, and then of course, Estuary came from this because I had so many people coming at
Mm.
me, and what I knew how to do was I just started to have to knit furiously and had to watch how let's say the secondary leaders would emerge
Mhm.
and then create in some senses, the small groups. But you have to do that with this very idiosyncratic, interesting gathering of people from the internet, some of whom are Christian. And in terms
Mhm.
of those who identify as Christian, they're all over the ecclesiastical map: Orthodox, Catholic, Protestants of all stripes, Mormons. I mean, we just got all because the internet is bringing all these people in, and the TLC is not confessional as such.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
Mhm.
and that's
Mhm.
how, and so that's, but in people hearing your story, I mean, the case is that only probably a few hundred or maybe a couple thousand will actually listen to this story because most people are going to YouTube to get their little dopamine hit.
Mhm.
And to actually listen to a story like this, it requires something of the listener, and then that investment then produces fruit too. So anyway, so
Mhm.
all that to say, thank you for your story. And in my experience, which was a complete surprise with this, I think what you'll find when the story finally sort of gets to the full open channel, I think you'll find the experience a good one. Almost everybody does because most of my listeners, especially in the comments, they can be generous and they can be encouraging. And especially in the early days when we had a lot of people who were really struggling with things, the community that sort of built up, even in the comment section on YouTube, which I think couldn't happen,
Mhm.
they found support. And it's out of there that a bunch
Mm.
of the relationships began to grow, and that sort of created the TLC and this estuary network. So,
I doing a lot of small group work. We led a small group, gosh,
yep,
10 years, over 10 years.
yep,
And we always tell stories,
yep,
tell our stories as the way to
yep,
begin knitting a group together, right?
yep.
Because it is understanding someone in context, right? That all of a sudden, you know, maybe there's certain things about me or the way that I interact on X which are a little irritating to someone, right? But when they hear that it comes from this space or this dynamic, right, it begins to make sense, right?
Right.
And Lewis has this famous quote at the end of Experiment in Criticism where he's talking about literary people who read all these stories and they need them because there's something in the human soul that it's not enough just to see through my eyes. I need to see through. I am part of a body, right? And I just as this finger is only properly itself, when it is integrated participatorily with the rest of the body, like I need to see through the eyes of others. Literature is one way to do that with people who lived long ago or far away, right? And sharing our own stories, our own living literature
Yep.
is another way to see the world with that myriad of eyes and that richness, which, is how we act. As I said, like it was hard for me to learn to bond with people because of the emotional isolation I lived in, right?
Yeah.
That is the way into the hearts of one another, right?
Yeah.
To sit down and to hear those stories. And I think, one thing I'm thinking about with is, again, I feel like I kind of bounce on the edge of this little corner because I'm not I'm not sure how to have the time. One thing I've found at dinner, as we think about, okay, this is good, we don't want to throw it away, but it is tricky to properly integrate, right? Because we'll sit down at dinner. Well, on a day when my head's been online, maybe I listened to one of your videos and I was on Twitter and maybe I was doing work for teaching the Odyssey, and then I come with all this to talk about, and the rest of my family's like, what are you doing?
I've been
And
banned from certain dinner tables.
yeah. And so how there's, one way I think about what this space is doing is people who are maybe in seasons like mine where they're lost and they don't know how to, but the internet draws you in and then you encounter people and stories and it can then bounce back out to your real life of like, okay, in this space, I kind of pulled myself together the Lord in his graciousness help me piece together a sense of myself and a sense of what's going on. And I began to make friends and experience being knowing and being known, but I can't live 100% in the digital space. I got to find a way to bounce this back into incarnational space, right?
Yes.
And I feel like that's kind of what we're all trying to figure out and negotiate,
Yes.
right? And I don't, I just try to look for the best strategy I have right now is I just try to look for overlap wherever I can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So our Bible study, sometimes I'll share a video and then encourage other people, like, was there a podcast you were listening to? Like, share it with our group and we'll take 5 minutes to talk about it. Like, where can I just make any kind of point of overlap as one step of trying to integrate these spaces? And I don't know if you have other bits of encouragement or thoughts on how you're trying to help pastor people in that way.
Well, all along, I've always told people that I am not actually your pastor. I can't be your pastor. This is not a pastoral relationship fundamentally. It doesn't mean that good things can't happen. This morning, Luke Thompson had a live stream, and it's a common thing that comes up where people are like, well, what are we doing? I said, well, most of the doing doesn't happen on screens, okay? So if you're looking on screens to see evidence of the doing, you're probably going to have to understand sort of second order things. And this has been an issue for me right from the start because I pastor a small, struggling church. And very quickly, what happened on the internet was very disconnected with what was happening in the church because nobody in the church watches YouTube, at least, especially when we started, because why would they? And so then, and it's part of the reason that Estuary has developed the way it has, because now in our local estuary, which meets every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. And if you're looking for something to play around with in your church plant, just as a tool for small groups, the estuary protocol works really well.
It was fun to experience that because I totally, yes,
Yeah.
I've been in enough small group things. I'm like, y'all have hit upon something that really is workable. That was really fun to be part of.
Yeah. So our little 9 o'clock estuary here, it's about half people from the church and about half people either not from this church or don't go to church. And I always wanted, because my ministry has always sort of been half in and half out. Because when I got here, a good chunk of the membership didn't live in the local neighborhood. But because I've had so much inner city pastoral ministry and ministry with the poor, just winding up working with homeless, mental illnesses, poverty, neighborhood. I've always had to negotiate sort of different spaces within church. And so then when the internet thing happened, I needed to, I was using the church for Jordan Peterson meetups, but there are two groups. And for a while, I was a little concerned. What if the Jordan Peterson meetup group gets bigger than the church? What if that happens? But the Jordan Peterson meetup thing was sort of a wave. And, then we, got going with Estuary. So the, my thinking of this is that sort of like okay, let me step back. In evangelical churches, as sort of in your husband's story, a lot of people think that the climax of a Christian's life is full-time professional ministry, and that's wrong. So here's where my Calvinism comes in, and it's Protestantism. We have the priesthood of all believers. Everyone has a calling. Now, when I tell people in the church that my calling is no higher than the calling of the hydrologist or the mom or the retiree, nobody believes me. I learned that very quickly in ministry. Everybody, no, you have a special higher calling. It's like, that's not actually what our theological tradition says. And the goal of ministry is actually your maturing in your calling, in your vocation, in the story and the role that God is leading you into his kingdom. And that doesn't mean you need to go to Bible school or seminary necessarily. There's only a group of us who need to do that, and we have our part in the body to bring the body to maturity. But the maturity includes artists and electricians and accountants and garbage truck workers and all of the things that it takes for a flourishing world. So some of that is very true of the TLC. And many of the people, like now looking at all these hundreds of conversations I've had with people over the last 8 years, many of these people don't participate anymore. Part of that is just YouTube churn, but part of it is like the prototypical rando who was Job from the Netherlands, who now is an elder in his church. He's a father of two. He just doesn't have time for the TLC or this anymore because he's living the product of what we wanted to help enable in them. It's
Right.
like the goal of learning relationships is not to become a psychologist and a relational coach.
Yes.
The goal of learning relationships is to be in a healthy, fruitful relationship. That's the goal. And what I think we've tended to do in internet land is imagine that the goal of a Christian is to be a minister or a priest, or the goal of a relationship, someone learning relationships, is to be a relationship coach. It's like,
Yeah.
no, the
Yeah.
goal is to be a human being and the one that God has called you in particular to be in all of that complexities through a lifelong arc.
Yeah.
And
That's really, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
It's really parallel to what Jonathan Pageau is saying about art in a sense,
Yes.
right? And I'm going to tie this to, I just reread Kingsnorth's Against the Machine. And he talks about the way that what the machine does is he has this image of I imagine like a big harvester. And you see the movie Cars and the huge harvester out there that's scares everyone at night. So this huge harvester that comes and everything, it just pulls up everything and commodifies it, right? And turns it into something for efficiency and profit.
Yep.
Just devours everything and spits it out as profit. And that's the mentality, though, that we've absorbed there, where whatever it is that we love, or maybe as a gifting or as a good, we have to make into a career. Right. And that's actually just the machine talking on a personal level of where, and I coach kids in high school all the time about that. Oh, do you love music? Don't be a musician. Do not, oh, you like to draw? Do not go to art school. Just draw because you like it, because you're a human.
Yeah.
And that's where Pageau's saying, he's fighting against art for art's sake. That to do art is to elevate art to this, oh, you got to be an artist and be in these museums versus art. What if it just serves life? That we, in our context, make things that we use that are beautiful because we're humans who need beauty, and putting it back in its proper context, I think is what you're saying. Do you think there's a parallel there?
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, and it's part of what, so I will pastor this church as long as I can. I'm nearing retirement. What happens after retirement? I don't know. But I've always
Your family commune.
the compound,
Oh,
not
compound. Sorry,
commune.
that's right.
If you say commune, I won't get anybody there. Because
Farm.
my kids
The
are
family
already a little
homestead.
worried about me because this whole online thing, it's a little culty, Dad, because people
Yeah.
show up, and so not commune.
Sorry. Homestead family.
Homestead. There's a good word. No, so it's even how we do it. The goal isn't to become a YouTuber. Now we use YouTube, but we use it in ways like I'm always dealing with this tension of, on one hand, a little bit bigger, a little more reach, a little more money, that would have that gives affordances, but it does lead you then into that machine world.
Yeah. And it's harder to
And
scale the heart of what you're doing as you move
right.
up in.
Well, and scale is the problem. What it should be is more growth. And growth involves, I mean, kids, once you have kids, you learn they don't always grow at the same speed. They're growing, when they're real little, they grow like crazy, really fast. And then they sort of slow down. But other things are growing in them. And then they grow some more. And then they slow down. And other things are being wired in them. And so the goal is not to, to do this. And I was just listening to a conversation I had with Sam Tiedemann in the early years, because when I started this, everybody wanted to hockey stick this thing and to make a corporation and to make a thing. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. And people were really frustrated with me. And it's like, you can be frustrated and leave. You can leave. Anybody, this is not a cult. Anybody can leave anytime they want to. Find what is helpful and be helped. And if you never come back again, God bless you. Because part of, again, if you want to know about Calvinism, part of it is I am not in charge. God is in charge. And I can save no one. You know, it's God who brings salvation. And so whatever part I can play in whatever super complicated story God has you in, I'm going to try and play that and just point you to him and facilitate whatever it is that he's doing in you. And that's fundamentally the pastoral role. So as always, I release these Randos conversations because they don't tend to be as sort of as narrative and time connected as these sort of homeroom videos. And so I use them sort of to fill in, or so I've released the conversation with Michael Sartori's father, which was a great conversation. I know, again, it's a Randos conversation, so a lot of you won't watch it, but it's out there on the channel. And my conversation with Wambui, that one will come out quite soon too, because again, I'm traveling next week and I don't know if I'm going to be able to make any content. So then it's like, well, I'm going to just leave the 24/7 thing run. Maybe, I don't know. Am I going to make little membership videos while I'm gone? Maybe, I don't know. I should make a video about that conference coming up because it's kind of an important development in the whole saga of the Christian Reformed Church. So I should report on that. Not even, just for the corner, but also for, the CRC people who watch this channel. It's a definite minority in the channel, but they like information too. So, yeah, I don't know. And so then I usually bank up some of these conversations and so that the channel isn't empty. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. Again, this is all sort of discovery. You just play with things and see what happens. And so in the spirit of that, the last thing here is going to be this long video conversation I had with Sam, which in some ways was sort of forgotten. I remember distinctly Sam mentioned some unauthorized, maybe he'll release those videos now, because what I liked about that video, that was sort of an important time in 2020 when the channel had gotten large enough. The TLC had sort of developed to a degree. It's developed a lot more since then. But people were asking, you know, especially because Pangburn, if you remember Pangburn and what happened with that, Pangburn had sort of collapsed, and Sam and some of the other Chicago people were like, hey, maybe we should step into that and do it. And it wasn't a bad idea. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a conference promoter. Still getting over a cold. It's not that I don't like promoting conferences. I like promoting conferences when I believe in the people, and they're usually small conferences. But I don't want that to be my job. It's not my vocation. It's not my calling. I'm not going to the internet to get a job to be a conference promoter. It's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in doing what I'm doing. That's what I'm interested in. I just had my Monday conversation with my mother and my sister and my brother-in-law, and my sister's the one. I got her into YouTube. She got me playing around with the 24-hour streams, although we're using them for very different things. And then lately she's been making books, like photography books and things, and so she's selling those. She's making good money selling those. And so, you know, business-wise, she's much more interested in the internet and YouTube as a business than I am. And then she says, guess what I'm doing now? And I thought, and my mother's like, don't have any new ideas, because that's more like my mother. But Ruth and I, we have lots of new ideas. Ruth's like, I'm making brooms. And so, you know those colonial brooms and things. She's going to be making brooms, and I'm sure she's going to be making videos about making brooms, and she's going to do that for 6 months or a year, and she's going to be sick of making brooms, and she's going to be on to something else and something else and something else and something else. When, as I've said before, when Jordan Peterson talks about people who are very creative and very high in openness can't monetize, that's my sister. Because once she finally perfects it, it's like, wow, I know how to make brooms great. I'm tired of making brooms. I want to do something else. Oh, look at that thing. And then she goes and does that thing. I'm a little bit slower than her, so I do abandon plenty of things, which some of you who've been around can notice that. But I tend to stick with other things. I've got half my father and half my mother in me, so then I like routines too, and so I tend to do the same thing over and over again, and I like kind of going back over things, so that's why I do it. So the next hour and 50 minutes of this video is my conversation with Sam from August 2020. So we're 5 months into COVID, 14 days to flatten the curve. So we're 5 months into COVID. The Thunder Bay Conference has been canceled. We're transitioning from the Jordan Peterson meetups into Estuary, but all of that is really very unknown. And Sam has ideas. And I've got values and things I'm sticking with. And so we have that conversation. And it's a great conversation. So that's the rest of this video. So some of you will be disappointed because you'll see this massive video and you'll be like, oh, all this new content. And then you'll be like, oh, some of it's rerun. Well, fine. It's probably new to you. Others of you will be like, massive video. I'm not going to watch that. I don't have time. And that's why I'm kind of a silly YouTuber, because who makes videos like this? So I do. Here it is. Ta-da! Leave a comment. Hi, this is Paul and Sam. Many of you recognize Sam from various of my videos, and we're going to talk about Estuary today. Sam has made a couple of unlisted videos with a few ideas about Estuary, and so I thought, well, why don't we have a conversation about this? So let's jump in, Sam. So you've got lots of ideas, maybe more ideas than I have. So let's start with some of your thoughts.
Sure, I feel a little bit like Bob Dylan. My unlisted videos are often more popular than my listed videos. But yeah, well, I mean, I've been listening to you and other people talk about the estuary, and even just beyond what the estuary is, sort of just broader ideas of where our community could and should go next, and even who is our community, and what makes it a coherent thing, and who's in and who's out, and all of those sorts of questions. So I made a couple of videos really just kind of processing my thoughts, and I sent those to Paul and a couple other people. I would share them more widely, but I realized that I doxed myself in those videos, so I won't give the link publicly, but hopefully we can talk through all of that here.
Okay. Well, it might, I've had a couple conversations about this. I had a conversation yesterday with the Thoughtful Ape from the Discord server, and perhaps it's helpful for me to lay out some of the genesis and origin of these ideas. In many ways, these came about after, obviously some of it comes about out of my frustration as a minister in terms of trying to find ways to connect with people who won't darken the door of a church. Part of it comes from my experience of making videos about Jordan Peterson, starting the local meetup, being a regular participant in the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, recognizing that a lot of people need a space that isn't exactly church. And it's in church's mission, and I think the interest of the church in mission to find ways to create those spaces. And I think that makes churches healthier, because actually right now someone just sent me a video of a guy who's he's a Christian on YouTube talking about politics and all the normal issues evangelicals talk about in all of the normal ways evangelicals talk about them. And I listen to this and I think, I can understand how in some ways this individual is serving the church, but there are many, many people who, for one reason or another, simply can't engage in that conversation. And I recognize that churches, for a very long time, have sort of an insular self-sufficiency to the degree that they can't have they struggle to have productive conversations with these people. Now, if you live in the Bible Belt and most of your friends go to church with you, then this might not seem like a problem. But if you don't live in the Bible Belt, or you've got some aspect of your life or some significant relationship with a person who has an aspect of their life that sort of puts them on the outside of church,
Mm-hmm.
churches have a tremendous, they're sort of like Henry Ford selling cars. You can have any color you want as long as it's black. And that's pretty much where the conversation ends. Now, obviously, Ford Motor Company has changed its ways since the days of Henry Ford. But, and so then in watching what had happened around my YouTube channel, and with the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and with our local, what was then a Jordan Peterson meetup, I thought the church needs to have a space for conversation. Now, someone could rightly criticize me by saying, yeah, but Paul, you're mostly having this conversation. Most of the members of your church don't participate in the conversations you have, and that's fair. At the same time, the members of my congregation have been generous towards these conversations. They've been generous with my time. They've been generous with our facility. And as the members of my church, not all of them, but some of them, as the members of my church, bit by bit, come into community with some of these members who are outside of the church as part of the meetup, I see bonds growing. And it's also the fact that for many members of my church, their children won't come to church. Their grandchildren are not being brought to church. And part of this is because the children of the membership have come to the conclusion that okay, church is doing their thing, but it's functionally irrelevant to my life. And I think they're wrong.
Maybe until I get married, but yeah.
Maybe until I get married, and maybe there'll be some itch that I don't understand that I'll want to somehow have my children be raised in some kind of faith. But the church has simply done an exceedingly poor job connecting. I wanted to say connecting what's happening in the newspaper, but by newspapers. Maybe they're still thinking about the newspaper. What's happening in the day-to-day manner of people's lives with what I believe are, in fact, what the church is talking about, should be talking about, but often in different language. And so for me, at least in terms of the church, an estuary is a place where the church can get to know, the church can learn a little bit, the church can learn some things, and those outside the church can learn some things. Because my experience of those outside the church is often they have a list of biases and prejudices about the church, which are about as unfounded as what the church has about those outside of it. And so I look at this disconnect and say, you know, these people can understand each other. These people are neighbors. These people are friends. These people can have a productive conversation. And in fact, I think both sides would welcome and enjoy productive engagement with each other surrounding things that matter to both of them. This doesn't seem impossible. And in fact, my experience on my YouTube channel and with the meetups and with all of the things that have flowed from there has been, I'm finding that both sides are enjoying it. Now, both sides tend to be busy and skeptical, and so I find resistance on the church side. Well, if these people really are interested in what's going on in here, they should come and sit in a service. Well, okay. All right. But even people that I've seen coming in from watching my YouTube channel who, quite frankly, get more hours of me each week than the members of my own congregation, those people come into church and they're kind of like,
this isn't like what I expected Paul's YouTube channel inside a building to look like.
Exactly.
Yes.
So this is where this all began. And I, right away when I had no idea how much impact releasing one word would have, it was that demonstrates that it was a
well-chosen word.
A well-chosen word. But I'm frankly delighted at the productive mess that I see it creating. So, and I see you as part of that productive mess, Sam. So let's do some messy production together.
All right. Well, I mean, I think part of this is that America, the West and perhaps America in particular, is entering a post-Christian age that is very unfamiliar to itself in terms of its own history. In times past, how the church related to the larger community was more straightforward, and that the church has a lot of experience of living in that world, but it's starting to live in a new world, and that this is bringing up all sorts of new questions that need to be answered in terms of how churches relate to things. Like, even when I was a kid, like going to like the Cub Scouts, it sort of made sense that the Cub Scouts met in like the local mainline community church, and that some of the people in the Cub Scouts attended that congregation, but not everyone did. But it wasn't weird that it was at the church, and the nursery school was there. And yeah, kids, even Jewish kids went to the nursery school that was technically at a mainline Christian church. And, like all those sorts of things that, talking about going to church didn't seem weird. But like that was, you know, the 1990s, I guess, and I'm not that old, but even I can notice that things have changed in the couple decades since then. And like you, well, so I grew up, I mean, I'm from the Midwest, which is like, if you were to draw around the Bible Belt, you would say, yeah, I live in the Bible Belt, but then it's like, well, Chicago's not the Bible Belt.
No.
Chicago is a different thing. Chicago is a coastal city in the middle of the country. And if you grow up in sort of the snooty suburbs, then it's even more like the East Coast or the West Coast than, say, if I were to drive an hour north into rural Wisconsin, right? But at the same time, rural Wisconsin's only an hour away from me, whereas it's not an hour away from Long Island or something like that. So so that's something that I can kind of see that things are changing. Like when I grew up, you know, like I said about the Cub Scouts and all that, that was kind of normal. But in like high school, it was very weird to talk about religion. In college, it was even weirder to talk about religion. Working in liberal oriented tech companies since college, it is even weirder to talk about religion, and it's super weird to even talk about politics or anything that doesn't sort of meet a party line anymore. So over the course of my life, I've mainly lived in liberal places, and I've mainly worked and been surrounded in liberal places, but I grew up in a very conservative, you might even say fundamentalist oriented church, and have mainly attended churches that are kind of like that. Like you talked about, so in the video where you talked about, like, I think a good example of this, and then we can branch into other directions. So in the video about the founding fathers, where you talked about Sam Adams, you talked about Park Street Church, right? And you said you had maybe had cousins or aunts or uncles or some sort of relatives who went to Park Street Church. And Park Street Church is, if you go to Boston, you can't miss it. If you go to the Boston Commons, there's one big, super stereotypically New England looking church right on the Boston Common with a big steeple, and it's on the Freedom Trail. And Sam Adams is buried in their backyard. And it's, you know, it's a holdout conservative Puritan church right in the middle of Boston. And when I lived in Boston, that was where I went to church. And you know how weird it is for me to be the person who went to that church.
When did you go to that church?
I was in grad school in Boston in 2016-17.
What service did you go to?
The traditional one, of course.
You would have been there with my sister and my brother-in-law.
Probably. Yeah.
Because they're there every Sunday morning at the traditional service. They sat in the same seat. You probably would have recognized them.
That it's a somewhat big church. It's almost 1,000 people on a Sunday, maybe 500 or something.
But my sister and brother-in-law, my brother-in-law's been there his whole life, and my sister, you know, went there, you know, when she met my brother-in-law, and you know, so anyway, so yeah.
And Gordon Hugenberger was my pastor.
Gordon Hugenberger. I did the eulogy at my sister's service, and Gordon did a nice talk at the calling hours for us.
Wow.
And wonderful. You know, my sister and brother-in-law just love him. So yeah, funny. Mm-hmm. I didn't know we had this connection.
Right, and you know how weird it is that I would go to that.
Yes.
But Sam Adams is buried in the backyard, so I guess it just makes sense. So that church is sort of something like a symbol of the relationship to Christianity and modern American society, right? It's there in the middle still, but it doesn't know how it relates to anything anymore. Yes. And it's on the Freedom Trail, right?
And so Park Street is, you know, some people have likened the movie First Reformed, where First Reformed was in fact a museum. You know, you had a little worship service there with a few odd people, but it was basically a museum. And so Park Street remains a living, breathing, vital congregation, but they are also a museum. And yes. My niece, for one of her summer jobs was the basically at Park Street giving the little talk to the waves of tourists that would come in, understanding how that church functioned within the broader ecosystem. And surely churches continue to function within the broader ecosystem in American society today. I mean, it's national news. Jerry Falwell Jr. and his wife and the pool boy. But the way they function within the ecosystem is quite a bit different than during the Revolutionary War period, even if it may not be the case that fewer Americans go to church today than went to church on Sundays during the Revolutionary War. I mean, a lot of people premise it on, well, fewer Americans go to church today. No, not necessarily. A lot fewer went to church, you know, in that period than today. And if you read history of that period, you'll begin to recognize that, you know, the religious convictions of George Washington and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were interesting.
Yes.
And but today there is a severe disconnect where in some ways religious and people who don't consider themselves religious are having real difficulties having conversations.
Yeah. And the default is that, at least in sort of like, if you're a millennial working at a tech company with a lot of other millennials, the default is that religion is weird and silly. And if you accidentally let slip out that you went to church this past Sunday, people like take note of that and maybe quickly change the subject. There is no natural way to bring that up in conversation.
Except that with certain forms of what people would not consider religiosity, well, I was meditating this morning. That would be considerably less weird than saying you went to church on Sunday. The fact that maybe you went to yoga, you go to yoga in the morning before, that would be considerably less weird.
Or even a mindfulness retreat or something in, you know, the desert of Arizona or something. When, you know, people might get interested in that, or doing some interesting things at Burning Man, that's totally normal. But like going to an actual Christian church regularly on a Sunday, that's weird, and people don't know how to deal with that. And a lot of Christians that I know that are in those environments just learn to keep it quiet, right? Even as evangelical, as much fervor as they have for spreading the good news, they even then after a while learn how to just not really bring that up very much unless it's with trusted people. So that's why I think is part of the context for this whole estuary thing is that the circumstances for the American church, like Europe maybe has been dealing with this a little bit longer than we have, although even then it's just so different, right? When there's state churches and you like Italy, you know, yeah, sure, way less people go to church in Italy than go to the church in the US right now, but it's Italy, for heaven's sakes, you know, right? So it's just a very different and new thing. So it requires a little bit of a shifting of priority and strategy in terms of how the church is going to relate to the outside world. And places like Sacramento are probably at the cutting edge of having this be a difficult problem.
Yeah, well, Sacramento in many ways is sort of an estuary in terms of the cultures of America, because we're the state capital in a very blue state, but we're also a valley ag town. And in the Central Valley of California tends to be where you'll have your red state critters. But you've got a fair amount of blue state critters. So Sacramento itself is extraordinarily diverse, and has created for itself a culture which I would say is estuary friendly. And in that way, it's not exactly the Bay Area, but it's certainly not Fresno. So you know, it's so that's and as an,
and you're literally an estuary.
Yeah, it is literally an estuary because the delta is right here. And so as the retired chief hydrologist for the state of California who goes to my church says, you know, the size of the Delta watershed here is a quarter of the size of the Mississippi watershed. And when you think about how much water flows through the Mississippi Delta, the California Delta is a significant estuary for the West Coast. But
well, Chicago is built on an estuary too, but only kind of, because our rivers flow into freshwater lakes. So there's it's not really quite the same thing, but it's kind of the same thing.
we'll let it count for now.
Sure.
So, but right away, people, and I'm not blaming anyone for here, because others have said, well, you sure didn't give a lot of details with that. You basically said a word and everybody jumped to their own conclusions about the word, which is fine. But the initial idea was that Paul Vanderklay is starting an estuary in which all these other people can inhabit. And okay, in a sense, I've already done that by my YouTube channel. So as I said, the church channel, there's a Livingstone's Christian Reformed Church YouTube channel that has less than 1,000 subscribers, and most videos there get, less than 200 views. And that's mostly me. And then my personal YouTube channel. And so there is a difference between them. And that's sort of the difference between Livingstone's Online and Estuary. Estuary is much more my YouTube channel, where I am thinking out loud, having conversations with people of various backgrounds, and exploring what can be explored. Now, how this, and then you and I have spoken before about, there are lots of cool ideas that I have and what others have in terms of how to pursue like-minded ventures like this. Mm-hmm. But I am not in a position at this point to be founder of Estuary Inc., in that right. I do have a day job, and I don't intend to leave the Christian ministry to pursue this. Might become would it even be a parachurch organization? I mean, what kind of thing would it be? But my goal has been to, well, let's see what can be done, and maybe partnerships, and find people and find money, and I'd rather see 3 or 4 or 5 significant estuary enterprises launch. And the fact that even though there's Bridges of Meaning, which is the Bridges of Meaning Discord, which is a significant estuary project, just in terms of numbers of people who are relating to it. But I'm in conversation with other individuals that are not very visible on my YouTube channel, if at all, who are in fact thinking along these lines and starting things that are very similar to this, but not necessarily in alignment, not necessarily Christian. But I've been in conversation with a lot of these individuals, and so I am not looking to sort of found something to either enfold or exclude these efforts. My goal is much more to facilitate more and more of these efforts, that to see them launch. And mm-hmm. so then when I watched your, I talked to you and Hank's been on the channel, you guys coming out of I like the fact that in some ways, some of these beyond meetup projects are sort of growing out of meetups.
Yeah.
Because you and Hank and some others in Chicago, you've now got a face-to-face relationship. You can, whether or not you can do it with COVID, but you can go and see each other face-to-face. You can know each other's families to a degree. You can have an in real life relationship. And I would love, and that's been the case of our Jordan Peterson meetup here in Sacramento that is continuing to evolve. There's another pastor in Edmonton, Alberta, who is also doing some of these things. And he's a Christian Reformed minister. And, I'd like to see, other Christian Reformed churches and other not even non-Christian Reformed churches up and down the West Coast also develop into some of these things. And in many ways, I see Urban Abbey, the host of what was going to be a conference this September, and hopefully, Lord willing, September 2021, with myself and Peugeot and Vervaeke. And I had that conversation with Scotland Morrison about Urban Abbey and its ethos. These are all estuary-like enterprises. And whereas it may come to pass that one day I am the leader of some estuary Inc. at some point, that day is probably not in the next year or two. And it's my practice to think in public, because if I wouldn't have a YouTube channel if I didn't think in public. I find it extremely helpful to think in public because
you get feedback.
I get feedback, and all of you can error correct my thinking, whether I like it or not. And that's actually a blessing, says the book of Proverbs.
Right.
So,
and you don't just get handpicked, curated feedback. You get all sorts of feedback that you didn't expect, and maybe some that you don't quite want, but it's out there and it happens, and that's part of it. And it's the way of turning conversations and making them a way of butting up against reality instead of just having them be pretend, I think.
That's
something like that.
And also then to have my ideas tested much more rigorously by all of you. Maybe my idea of not starting the estuary is a bad idea. And maybe that bad idea will get beaten out of me in this process. That could happen too. Maybe I had an idea with a word that I can't pull off, but someone else comes around and actually makes it happen. And so, Christianity has this way of both infusing people with value and also making individuals to one degree or another disposable. And I think both of those ideas are true and correct. And so my participation in this is, in some ways disposable.
By making people disposable, you mean that it creates something that's bigger than the individual, so even if the individuals drop off, it keeps going.
Exactly.
There are other ways. When I first heard you say it, I was like, what? Oh, that's what you mean.
No,
right.
because and the Apostle Paul exemplifies this in the New Testament when he says, he looks at the Corinthian church, and some of them are fighting, well, they're fans of Paul and other fans of Apollo and other fans of Peter. And Paul's like, no, we are the body of Jesus Christ. And so Paul Vanderklay, to whatever degree God uses Paul Vanderklay, so be it. But the mission and the effort goes far beyond him, out of love for people. Right.
So we should at least mention Jordan Peterson in all of this.
Okay.
Right? Because part of what's going on with your YouTube channel and Bridges of Meaning and all of this is connected to something that he got going. And it's been 3 or 4 years since that ball started rolling. I'm not sure if we've really found any clearer the words to describe what exactly it is that's going on. But it was something like there had been this built up animosity and confusion and distrust and lack of ability to communicate between kind of, I don't know, the Christian culture and especially the intellectual American culture. And that he somehow just like, with, some strange lectures, bridged that divide almost immediately in a way that was new and refreshing, and that a lot of people found exciting and meaningful, and some people even found life-changing, right? And so your channel got going just sort of trying to talk about what's happening there and sort of building off of that. And so something involved in what was going on around the wake of Jordan Peterson in 2017, 2018, thereabouts, is connected to what we're doing. But your criticism of Jordan Peterson, which I think is totally valid, is that he was not institutionally minded. He was, the one-man traveling show. He went around to a whole bunch of cities. You saw him. I saw him. Hundreds of thousands of people saw him all over the world, giving his one-man evangelization tour of telling people to clean their rooms and get their lives in order. And to the extent that it did things, it did a lot of good things, but it was so focused on him that, some health stuff and whatever, and he's off the scene, and seemingly that influence just dissipates, right? There are some things that have stuck around that are sort of clearly moving in the wake of and in the direction that he had last been pointing in. But it's interesting which of those things have kept their momentum and which haven't. But the thing is he didn't have an institution to keep momentum beyond himself.
Yes.
And so we want to do something, we the church, want to do something that doesn't have that downside, and that's able to pick up on some of the good things he got going and to give it institutional support and structure and longevity, and perhaps a clearer focus and a clearer telos than what he was doing.
Yes.
And so we don't want to just be the same version of Jordan Peterson, but just Paul Vanderklay. And then, once Paul, quits and retires or whatever, that it dissipates in the same sort of way. And that is, I think, the difference. And so what exactly is it that we want to do that does that?
That's a real good question. And part of the reason that, so we had, you were there, we had on Fridays on the Discord server, we have our, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. California time, we have our little question and answer for me, which we do different things. And then Andrea with the Bangs, who I had a conversation with about estuary, said, "Oh, let's talk more about estuary after the Q&A," which we did. And where was I going with this? Part of the point, Joey, who's from our meetup here, I thought he made a really strong point when he said, because my point was, I have a hard time laying down in words what's actually going on. Because yes, we are in Jordan Peterson's wake, and we're also sort of in my wake. I sort of played around and made some extra currents in his wake, and we created some structures that haven't endured. And the meetups that we have created downstream of Jordan Peterson, I think, have endured, while, to my knowledge, most of the rest of the Jordan Peterson meetups have just evaporated. And I think part of the reason we have skills of doing that is because our experience with institutions like the church and the institutional church have helped us gain a bit of longevity and structure and institutionalization. But the best, when I looked around, the best I could do was offer a metaphorical image to what I saw happening. And that image is an estuary.
It's a very prophetic thing to do.
Well, and it's because some people might say, well, Jordan Peterson was around for 2 to 3 years, and that's a long time. Well, I don't think 2 to 3 years is anything.
Yeah, well, that's all Jesus really did too.
That's right. But I think we have only begun to see the impact of that wave that Jordan was and rode. And I think what we are doing in this space is actually potentially of vital transformative power, not just in our own individual lives, but potentially for the church. Because I think what we are doing can offer churches that have painted themselves into a corner a new idea of doing something different. And I don't want it to narrow too quickly. And so, for example, Charlie at the Discord launched a new Discord, and I haven't told him this yet, but he'll hear it, I'm sure. It was so funny because when when the Sacramento group launched the Bridges of Meaning Discord, the reason we did it was because many people out there are not going to have the opportunity to have a face-to-face meetup group. And so, at least in the meantime, as a stopgap measure, this can be an online group for people for whom face-to-face meetings are likely not presently, nor may they ever be a convenient way for them to get together. And we have a number of individuals for whom that is true. And then when Charlie launched the Outpost, he gave the reason for being for the Outpost almost exactly what I had heard the local guys say. And I told Joey and Tyler, Rick, I said, you know, that is in many ways the highest form of flattery. Mm-hmm. Because don't look at what Charlie is doing as competition. Look at it as complementary, because your idea was in fact so good that, well, maybe he didn't quite get that idea from what you had created, but the idea was so good, he decided to take the initiative and do it himself. And I would love to see that sort of thing multiply. When after I did my YouTube channel and I saw this second wave, the Randos and Mary and Karen and others start their own YouTube channels, that to me was the greatest compliment they could ever give, because in a sense they saw me doing something. Hang on, someone's really in earnest to talk to me, so I'm going to pause this. Wrong number's one thing, wrong addresses. Something else. You're having services here for my niece this week? No. You're not the way? No. Do you know the way? It's like, you shouldn't ask a pastor that question. Anyway, so I want to see people start stuff and try stuff, because you don't know where it will go. And, you know, sometimes I'll talk to Karen and Mary and, you know, Bern has his power, and Bern Powers has his channel, and, you know, Bern has his power too. But, you know, if we can incentivize not just individuals to try things, but even have people come together. And I've seen that in our local meetup, and get some things going. Well, I'd rather start 10 or 15 things than one, because, you know, who knows where 10 or 15 things go. Often what happens is 10 or 15 things go, and not, you know, a bunch of them peter out, but some along the way pick up. The real key is that you're investing in people, and they are gaining capacity and learning and trying. And again, it's the same reason I think out loud in public, in that I get smarter when people disagree with me.
Yeah. And while giving people responsibility gives them a chance to learn from the feedback of experience and success and failure too.
Right.
And it's also okay if we try and do things and not all of them work either. Right. I think that there have been some people who are a little bit too scared of failure to want to try and do new things. It's okay if we mess up, and it's likely we will. But then we will learn something, and we'll keep getting better, and that is how you get better. So I guess maybe since we've scared away anyone but the dedicated after 40 minutes, I think that I would like to share some of the thoughts that I had when I imagined you first talking about estuary. So I'll give something of like a condensed and refined and slightly better version of the unlisted videos that I teased about. So what I think is a really interesting.
By the way, you and your wife are adorable together. You really are. I was just so charmed by it.
Thank you. And so my wife is in a group called Don't Mom Alone. So there's a podcast called Don't Mom Alone. And then they have like discussion groups, like sanctioned discussion groups, right? And there are leaders of those sanctioned discussion groups, and the leaders of the sanctioned discussion groups have a joint private Facebook page where they can discuss stuff and share stuff and coordinate stuff. And she has a super slick website. And if you want to start your own Don't Mom Alone podcast listen group, then you just click a couple buttons and they send you some resources, and you can register and you can find groups if they already exist, et cetera, et cetera. And then the host of this Don't Mom Alone group will go on traveling tours where she goes to these groups and hosts a live version of the podcast at these groups. And that's exciting for the people because they get to meet the celebrity in the flesh and then, you know, have some meet and greet and elbow rubbing time afterwards. And, you know, and I think she's probably writing a book and, you know, that sort of thing, right? So that's a little similar to what you're doing and a little different,
Yep.
right? And so, and also it's also just interesting, all the different voices in this. There's just really clearly a spectrum of openness to conscientiousness, I guess, to use Jordan Peterson's terms, right? The people who are like, oh, we'll just try a bunch of things and, you know, we'll see where it goes. And isn't the world an exciting, wonderful, you know, arena of possibility? And oh, don't try and put too many boundaries around it because, you know, we might kill what we have going. And the people are like, who knows what the rules are? What's going on? We need structure, we need lines, we need a plan, we need to, you know, right? There's just a little bit of that personality clash, and some of that, you know, those two different temperaments need to work together to use the best that each of those perspectives have to offer, and not just ignore each other because they're both partially right. But I guess I sometimes am a little bit more in the practical, we need to do something, we need lines, we need a battle plan, we need an organization. And also, well, I don't know, I've tried to start some startups in the past and stuff like that. I'm a little bit, I don't know, entrepreneurially minded and sometimes think, you know, how do we make this as successful as we can, as quick as we can? And there are dangers to trying to do that sort of thing. But also, if you don't do that sort of thing, you can be leaving harvest unharvested or wheat unharvested in the fields. So thinking about that Don't Mom Alone podcast, I feel like right now we have a couple meetup groups and a couple things that are similar-ish to us out there. But there is no shared coherent structure, really. They're like, no one besides like people really on the inside know that your Sacramento group really has any tangible connection to our Chicago group, right? There's no website that lists our two groups as part of the same whatever anything that one could find out there. And so part of me thinks that we could benefit from a little bit more of that sort of thing. And I think that you and I both agree that a lot of the Jordan Peterson stuff and your stuff has been driven through the internet, and that there are wonderful things about the internet and that it allows you to connect to people all over the planet Earth. And it also can have something of a self-filtering effect where you find people that are different from you in some ways, but there's at least something drawing you together. But there's something just a little bit disembodied and dissatisfying about something that's purely internet-based. Right? We're human beings. We need flesh and blood interaction. We need the words to be made flesh, as I said, instead of just being ephemeral. And so I think that, like, I think you and I would also both say that some of the most meaningful stuff that has come out of this are the interpersonal interactions from our live in-person group. And so really, I think what I really want for this group to do a little bit better is to make it easier for other people to get that. Because your group has had the benefit of at least you, as well as a bunch of, you know, other interesting folks. And the Chicago group, you know, it took a bunch of things going right for it to be able to succeed. And it almost didn't, and stuff like that. And so there are some of those barriers that we could make easier for others to overcome. Like I think I said in one of my videos, there's no New York City meetup group. Surely there's enough listeners of your podcast or the various other podcasts in New York City where there's critical mass to get something like this going, but it hasn't happened yet. And things like that, and, you know, ditto Boston or Houston or wherever you want to name. So what can we do to help make that easier? That really is what is at the front of my mind. And like, you know, I was like talking to my wife the other night. I'm like, so you go to that podcast group on Thursdays? Could you tell me a little bit more about how it works? And when she was talking to me about it, I was like, well, that's a great idea. Yeah, why? So I feel like when I first heard you talk about the estuary, this is what came to mind. I'm like, oh, Paul's trying to do something like this. And it has been interesting listening to what everyone heard you say when they heard you talking about the estuary. It was something of a Rorschach test where different people, immediately came to mind what their vision was, and that said a lot about who they were and what they wanted, and also about what you had been communicating. So I feel like some ways that we could foster in-person interactions are the meetups. We already know how to do them, and we know that they're good when we can get them to work. And I think we just need to figure out a couple ways that we could be more intentional about helping more of those things grow. And I feel like that is the foundation layer of turning this into a structure that isn't just technologically mediated, but is interpersonally mediated. And Luke is totally right that there is something absolutely different about interacting with people in an actual in-person community than whatever techno-babble interactions that we have in between. So I feel like building that foundation layer is really important to anything else that we want to do. But a group that gets together once a week, once a month, every other week, whatever, needs something to talk about, right? It gets boring if you don't have new things to talk about. A book club that doesn't read new books, it doesn't exist for much longer. And so I feel like that's the role that the internet media, that your channel and the other constellation of related channels can supply. It's the material, and it's new material that can sort of drive the conversation forward and keep it interesting and keep new thoughts coming into people's head and allow things to not get too stale, right? I think that's really the role of the internet media in terms of that. And maybe we could talk sometime, I don't want to lose my train of thought just yet, about how we could maybe even help that, right? Help the internet side of things be a little bit easier to find and navigate than it currently is. Right now it's a little esoteric and takes a little bit of expertise that some people will invest the time in to learn, but some people won't. And so we're leaving some audience behind by making it as difficult as it currently is to find all of these things. So I think that the meetups are like the foundation layer, and that there are ways to help get them started. Like you and Job and Van Donk, we're going to do your West Coast evangelization tour, the first missionary journey that got blown off course by a pandemic and crashed into an island and had to, go. Yeah.
And poor Job had to go back to the Netherlands.
And Job had, well, at least he got to go back. So that's one sort of thing. And then I feel like sort of you going around or other people going around and hosting those sorts of live events, because you saw Jordan Peterson in person, you've probably been to some other sort of things. It is more fun seeing people in person than it is watching a YouTube video. I will pay 30, 40, maybe even $50 for a ticket to go see some really interesting people talk at a theater in my city, that I won't pay 30, 40, $50 for a whole year subscription to their YouTube channel or something like that. And it's exciting seeing the audience and hearing the live interactions. And I don't know, I can remember the live conversations that I saw either Jordan Peterson or other people have much more clearly than I can remember a particular YouTube video. I can remember particular things that Jordan Peterson said when I saw him in person, and like all of his YouTube videos are kind of a fuzzy memory at this point. So there's something about going to a live event that I think is superior to an online YouTube conversation. And then I think retreats like the thing that you had in Connecticut are also a really cool idea. And then I think sort of like conferences like the thing that it was in Thunder Bay would also be cool. So I think like in a certain sense, we've already kind of trial run, or at least thought about, I'm not proposing anything that radically different, really. I'm not trying to claim any stroke of creative brilliance or novelty. I'm just trying to say, here are a bunch of pieces. Maybe if we put them together like this, it would work better and reinforce itself better. So I've been going for a while now. I'm curious to hear what you think of that.
Well, I agree. And in many ways, what you've been asking for
is more of a structure around, I mean, you're exactly right. The Connecticut event, I was going to do another such event in May or June.
Yeah.
We were going in March, we were going to go up the coast and stop at Salem, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. And what we've been trying to do with each stop is, just like we did in Tucson, is to give the local church and some of the, and some of the people who are watching my videos, kind of to bring them together at the same place. Because what happens in the church is that the church has, the pastor isn't watching my videos probably, maybe some of them are, but most of them aren't. And they're like, well, will anybody show up for this? And then when people show up, churches are like, oh, people will show up for this. We usually have to like give away bad food or have some, a tub full of candy to have people show up, and they never come back, and we don't actually talk to them, and maybe we're giving them free babysitting and we call it Vacation Bible School. And and so then when people actually show up, pastors are like, and they show up willing and ready to talk about the kinds of things that we talk about on my channel, then suddenly pastors are interested and like, oh, well, whether or not they stick with it, there's potential there.
But what I'm saying is like, say COVID goes away and you go back to Salem, Oregon, and there's a pastor there. What concrete steps or instructions can that pastor follow to do something that that's actually possible for them to do?
Yeah.
What are we asking them to do? Are we asking them to subscribe to their own meetup.com account, create their own thing with its own, unique name? And then, like, what is the connection between you being there and that pastor from Salem CRC or whatever church that it is? And what happens after that? And how is that connected to Chicago? How is that connected to Sacramento? How does it reinforce itself? How is it not just its own island left to fend for itself, and those sorts of things?
Yeah. And the problem with the current system is that connection is me, because I know the name of the pastor in Salem. And in most cases, I trust those pastors to have both enough initiative and experience to say, okay, what next things do I need to do to sort of help this group fan into flame? So Pete Vanderbeek up in Edmonton, Alberta, he's a transitional specialist. So he doesn't have a church. He goes around to different churches when
there's a gap in their pastorate or something.
Exactly. And so he's been doing this in Edmonton because that's where he lives, and he's actually got a group going. Of course, Vendonk has his group, and Vendonk's been slowly, talking to his congregation to have the congregation pick up on this. But you're very much right that we don't have a curriculum, which would tend to be what, let's say, this mom's group has. And
Right.
And part of the reason I've been, actually one of the things that I wanted to talk to, let me say this. Everything that you're saying, I agree with, and I would love to see take the next steps, okay? So don't hear any resistance from me, because we definitely need more structure. And the structure that we have now is still quite implicit. Part of the reason that I am hesitant to make I look at, you and Joey, both you and Joey, you've got some other connections in some other,
We worked for that same millennial tech company that
Exactly.
I was kind of alluding to earlier.
So there are connections and relationships out there right now, but also what I know is that there are more connections and relationships out there that are outside of the groups that you guys know. And so so if we start something with this, I'm totally fine with that. I just can't put in jeopardy some of those other relationships, because
Right.
there are, right now everybody is, the problem is that I know more than what you guys know in terms of the potential and the opportunities out there. And not all of those things I can talk publicly about. So And then I've got, you see, there's a whole nother layer of this, which is part of me is wondering at what point the Christian Reformed Church is going to, stop with its rash about Jordan Peterson and say, this, I look at my own denomination and I think, how slow can you be on some of this stuff, people? You're worried about this culture war over here. Forget the darn culture war and start talking to people. And I don't care if they're right, left, center. I don't care what they have. If they have eyes and ears and a mouth and can talk to them. But you're exactly right in that if we had more structure, it would be easier for Rob and for Pete and for John to get more support. The pause that I have with that is I'm really hesitant in terms of some local branding. So first of all, a mom's group, I mean, those things, any pastor knows, women's Bible studies, moms groups. I mean, those things are about as easy as, tripping on a bad sidewalk. Moms, once they have that baby, boy, are they desperate for a community. Boy, do they need wisdom. I mean, it's a great idea. I don't take anything away from them, but the thing naturally flows. There are other aspects. One of the really interesting moments in your conversation with your wife was, you're talking about this stuff and part of you is like, wouldn't this be great? Would you go to this? And your wife's like, no. and part of where this group, the groups have grown out of is that there is a male-female dynamic to this. And whereas in church, I'm in favor of women's Bible studies, I'm in favor of men's Bible studies, and I'm in favor of Bible studies where everybody's together. I like all three, and I'm not gonna prejudice against any of them. So part of this is the reason that, yes, we need more structure. And when we come out of COVID, I think it will be really good to probably have a more coordinated effort in terms of the next missionary tour to finally get up to the Pacific Northwest, but also for me to come to Chicago and for me to go to New Jersey because I'm from New Jersey, and the New York, New Jersey area, and Boston. I can do Boston, and I will do another retreat. And it would be nice to have at least some platform by which there's more cohesion here. At this point, that's just all sort of running through.
Right. It needs to be building on something.
Yes.
Right. Instead of just sort of flashes in a bunch of dislocated pans.
Right. And the, because when I did research before the Connecticut retreat, I did that Survey Monkey and I put it out there. And the message that came back through very clearly was that, we watch Paul on YouTube and it'd be fun to meet Paul and to have 2 or 3 days and to have a private chat with Paul. All that would be fun. That's sort of a function of kind of the celebrity stuff. And that is what it is. But also what came through strongly was the people wanted to meet each other because people have the sense that a lot of the other people out there listening to this channel and interested in estuary and these conversations, they're also interesting people. And so there is, and that's what I think.
And are there some near me? Because that's the weird thing. Like it used to be when, shows were on cable news, you could reliably trust that if you brought up a popular TV show at the water cooler, that someone there might know what you're talking about. But when there's just so many different podcasts and so many YouTube channels and stuff like that, well, man, I really love this pastor from Sacramento, but I have no clue. And I have, of extremely low probability that I can bring this up with anyone I know and they'll know what I'm talking about. And so it's frustrating and a little bit lonely to have something that you enjoy so much, but no one to share it with in your in-person life. And so we need to find a way to help make it easier to bridge that back into reality.
And to give it more visibility. No, you're exactly right with this because, you more than others have also been saying, much to my fear sometimes, when are Christians going to wake up to this? I mean, to me, with my denomination, I'm less worried about that because I know those cats and I can handle those cats. I've lived my whole life in that. The broader evangelical world, ooh, that's a lot bigger world. And the issues out there, as you well know more than anyone, those are complex issues. But one of the churches, we were talking to Tripp in Seattle, and if we had something a little bit more visible,
with a track record that hasn't caused any problems yet and has had multiple successes.
I'm keeping my wife away from the pool boy. We don't have a pool boy.
Right, because people need track records to trust doing a new and risky thing.
But so in some ways, on one hand, I very much want to keep addressing Christians and the church. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I also want to keep them at bay because I'm a minister, because of the type of content I have, because of some of my commitments, I will tend to trigger a tribal ambition among people that, oh, look, maybe Paul will be able to do to the atheists kind of like Jordan Peterson did. And that tribal game, that I listen to a lot of I listened to James. So James Tour had a conversation with Stephen. So James Tour's both world-class scientists, Discovery Institute. And I was listening to how James Tour is conducting that conversation. And again, I've got a world of respect when James Tour talks about the fact that we have no idea how life really started. I mean, a lot of these scientists are just, they're just making crap up, and they've basically willfully allowed a whole generation of people that just say, well, science knows how life started. And I love it that James Tour is coming out and saying, you're all full of shit. We don't have any idea how this started, and you can't prove it. I have my credentials. All of you know my credentials. And so when I'm calling BS on all of you, you have to listen because he's a credible scientist. But when James Tour, as he was conducting that conversation, he slid into this evangelical tribal mode that I think is, because it's so
you said Discovery Institute, and I immediately know what you mean.
Yeah, because it's so tribal, I think it betrays the actual mission of the church. Now, tribalism is natural, it's normal, it's essential to human beings. But when it comes to the church, what's interesting, what we see about Jesus is he doesn't seem tribal. And that's where that story of the unauthorized exorcist and why my identification of Jordan Peterson as that unauthorized exorcist is so foundational, because Jesus didn't seem to be terribly anxious about his intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And that confidence, I think, is a value that I try to express in my openness, but I think it's also something that anything that I wind up putting a fair amount of my life into, I want that organization to have that as well. And my hope is, and I think I've seen some of that has come into the culture as we've established it so far. And so for me, that's part of the reason that I'm a little careful about some of these church relationships. On one hand, I want to give ministers I want to give them a little vision for this can open up new conversations with people you really do want to talk to. It might not bear immediate fruit. It might not even bear fruit in your lifetime, but this is the this is the kind of time scope that churches are used to dealing with. We plant seeds
And are
that,
capable of dealing with
that's right.
uniquely.
That's
Mhm.
right. And we plant trees that will bless generations 2 or 3 generations from now. That's what we need to be doing. And so the church is too often like the Gene Wilder version of Willy Wonka, where those foolish children sell out short. And
Mhm.
whereas, come on, kids, stay out of the fudge pond. Keep your hands off the goose laying the golden egg. Hold off on the tribal grabbiness and have a credible conversation with someone.
Yeah, well, I mean, being a little bit personal, like part of the reason why I'm excited about this is like, honestly, I would love to be more involved with my local church than I am, but I can't be. And I just, have some natural compunction to want to be part of the kingdom work in whatever way that is available and open to me. And for whatever reason in God's plan, a lot of doors are often closed to me that I don't quite know why. Well, I do know why, but I don't know why. And so I will put my energy and my focus on those who let me. That's not an outrageous thing to do. And so this is something that I feel like I am welcome to participate in when a lot of other doors are closed. I kind of wish it wasn't this way. And for those reasons, full well that I am scared of having this be too associated with churches. If this is like a ministry wing of the CRC church, I'll start getting the jitters. And you know full well that I am a living embodiment of what will make this a difficult sell to a lot of churches.
Yes.
Atheists and Christians, fine. Sam, less fine. And so,
because atheists are pre-Christian. Sam's a heretic.
Right. Exactly. And so I know full well, while I have been elbowing you, like, why aren't you, I've said to you, why aren't you on the cover of Christianity Today? You're more interesting than 90% of what they talk about. And so, like, why don't more people know about all of the exciting things that are going on here, which is something that I thought so many Christians have been longing for decades. And yet when it starts happening, it seems like they're, conveniently ignoring it. And it's like, what is that about? And it's because of weird political stuff going on is the only reason that I can seemingly understand. But all right, so that's the church thing. There are a whole bunch of questions and issues about how this will relate to churches and to denominations and all of that stuff. And those will be thorny, and we both generally know that. But I think the other question is how is it, so this is an estuary, right? We have saltwater creatures, we have freshwater creatures, and we have creatures like me that are capable of swimming in both, but not fully welcome in either. And how do we find the saltwater creatures, and how the saltwater creatures find us, right? And if it's just these individual ministries at a bunch of individual churches with different names and that don't have much institutional oomph behind them or don't have any media or online thing connected to them, how are they going to find the people that they want to reach, right? And that's where I think having a clearer, more transparent, easier to follow connection between the online world and the brick and mortar flesh and blood stuff, will allow for that to happen. And we need to be clearer about building that bridge such that people can cross it and find it.
I think that's true. And I think that's fair. We've, at this point, I mean, I sort of followed in Jordan Peterson's wave. The meetups have followed in my wave. My wave isn't very big. And I think what we've had to offer is a culture. Part of what I see is that most efforts to get big on the internet betray the culture we are trying to grow. I got a really lovely little note from Paul Ann Leitner saying, he said, part of, Jordan Peterson got his rise because he basically, he put his surfboard onto the political riptide. And Jordan Peterson was, and this is something that I continue to make, Jordan Peterson was far more important than merely the political riptide that he put his board onto.
His most watched videos aren't his most overtly political ones.
That's right. That's right. So, but Jordan Peterson got his status rocket ride to one degree or another because of the politics. And I watch, again, that someone just sent me a video today of someone, I'm not going to name him, but when I listen to, he's an evangelical, he's basically on his video making the point that to be a Christian, you have to be a Republican. And whereas I'm a member of the Christian Reformed Church, probably 70% of the Christian Reformed Church are solid Republican voters. That's, and another 20% are solid Democratic voters, another 10% swing, or maybe that's 10% are solid Dems and 20s. I don't know what it is.
But not in the Jerry Falwell sense of swinging.
I will not play, and I think people understand that, I will not play these political games. I will critique woke religiosity from a theological point of view, because that's my interest in it. But a lot of the cheap ways to get big, I simply won't go there.
Yeah.
And
amen. And it would ruin our culture if you did.
Yes.
And
yes.
And if you did, I'm sure a lot of us out there would start poking you for it.
That's probably true. But you are right in that, partly because, we used Jordan Peterson. It wasn't, our group has for a long time not talked a lot about Jordan Peterson because he hasn't put much material into the stream. And even when he was on his book tour, he wasn't putting much material into the stream.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use Jordan Peterson as a way to find new conversation partners that we had a fairly high confidence level would be interested long-term conversation partners as we explore things together. Rebel Wisdom's sort of in there. Vervaeke. Vervaeke for a long time was sort of a tough sell with a lot of my audience. The Christians, he spooked the Christians too much. The Jordan Peterson, Vervaeke was just he felt a little too new agey or too lefty for some people, but I think John has demonstrated to this audience that he is a credible conversation partner who is not going to, and that's part of the culture of, as Sevilla said, this little corner of the internet where we are not playing cheap political games. Everybody has their politics, but we are not discriminating against people because of their politics. Mary's got her.
And even when Vervaeke and Pajot get together, they will talk about current events, right? And they'll talk about he who will not be named and stuff like that. But they're going higher. Like Vervaeke is a meta theologian. I think that's what Vervaeke is. He talks about the building blocks of theology itself, not about an individual theology per se, although sometimes that is seemingly what him and Jordan Greenhall talk about, is trying to, now that we've reverse engineered how theologies work, let's use that to build the one that we want. And so to give Andreas his due, so Andreas, he who is often first, his, like, when I've been talking with him about this, he's like, when I hear you guys talk about the estuary, it sounds like you're creating the religion that's not a religion that, Vervaeke and Weinstein and others are talking about. And I'm like, I see kind of part of your point, but well, that's certainly not your goal.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think there are some out there who, out of frustration with the churches available to them, have looked at the estuary as, oh, now I'm going to have this, this can function in my life like my church. Probably not.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. And this is why, I mean, Luke is like, well, the church should be this way. I'm putting it outside the walled garden of the church for this reason. Now, that doesn't mean that individuals won't derive, hopefully, some spiritual sustenance by listening to me and others think out loud. And I mean, I do theology on my channel, some of it. And so the fact that people are deriving some spiritual sustenance and edification from that, many people have told me they derived much from Jordan Peterson. So I am not going to, certain Spanish words work better than English words, are still in my head. I'm not going to dismiss or disparage people for having that dynamic in their life. And I would estimate at least 50% of North Americans who identify as Christian are, in the words of the Seeker movement, unchurched. And so the degree that these people can find something on Living Stones Online or on my YouTube channel, I am not going to despise them for that. I think eventually they are going to, they should look for a way to get into a in-person church. If some estuary local chapters actually become churches or church plants grow out of them, I'd be thrilled. So I'm not cutting off those avenues, but by positioning estuary as downstream from the church, that's part of my intentionality here, in that I am not trying to start a new religion. I already have one. Our Catholic members have one. Our Orthodox members, our Protestant members have them. Some who are in other religious traditions, you know, but I'm not going to give the cliche line like, well, anyway, I won't go there.
Yeah, we coexist, but we don't have coexist bumper stickers.
Right. And so, no, we are not trying to start a new religion, and any attempt to start a new Vanderklay religion, that I will get angry about, because I already have a religion and I have a master. So, you know, I'm taken.
Right. And, but I do think that, so obviously there's a couple things that are slowing us down at the moment. COVID is just a huge hamper on all of our plans at the moment, but at some point it'll go away, hopefully. And like I've said this a couple times, it's like we're sitting at a red light, and we could either have our engines revving, waiting for the light to turn green, or we could be caught asleep at the wheel when it does. And so I feel like this is a good opportunity for us to start to lay the groundwork and the plans and the institutions that will then be able to actually be implemented once COVID goes away. Another thing that's kind of slowing us down is the absence of Jordan Peterson, right? He was something of the engine, or, you know, something of the pathway into this corner of the internet for a whole bunch of people. And that has, you know, that bridge has kind of fallen away. And so there's a bunch of people who are already in, and we still get some new people, but the influx of new people is slower than it used to be, mainly for that reason.
Jordan Peterson was sort of like a hurricane that blew all this salt water up into the estuary, all the way up rivers into churches. So
yes, but who knows? He could come back, right?
It could be Hurricane Jordan 2.0. Who knows?
Right, the second advent, and that we could be ready for that if that were to happen. Yeah. But I'm not just here to say, oh, we just need to grow faster and we need to be concerned about numbers and stuff like that. I think some people interpreted me as saying that, and that's not what I'm saying. I think that you are right, and Joey said something similar, that really what we have to offer is a culture that we have helped foster and develop. Part of that is that we selected for a group of people that kind of already had a bunch of those traits, because it took a certain kind of person to get all the way to the Discord server. But also, I think that through our interactions, through your channel, through the conversations, through the other channels, we've embodied a culture that is spreading, right? People learn, people watch others, they see how others interact, and they start to imitate that consciously and unconsciously. But that is something that can only grow so quickly. A culture like that, yes, it can grow, yes, it can spread, but only at the speed of interpersonal transmission. And that is limited. And if we try and accelerate faster than that, then we will be turning into something that we aren't currently now, right? Instead of spreading what we currently aren't now. And so but if we don't grow, then we'll become decadent, and slowly people drift away and sort of will be stuck with the hardest core of the hardest core. And that's not really even what the hardcore want anyway. And so that's what I'm saying. And I feel like when I've been hearing you talk about that, Shrey, it sounds more Sacramento-centric than what I and a lot of other people who are perhaps further away from Sacramento envision and kind of hope for, because we hope that it will include us, and I don't want to just make you the bottleneck and that you have to do everything. I'm just saying, here's what you need to do while I get to sit on my butt and just watch you do it. There's a whole bunch of us out there that I think have energy and talents that we're ready and willing to pour in to make this happen. But we do also need you in some ways and in some capacities. And how exactly that works out, we'll have to figure out along the way.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about, I've had a number of ideas that I haven't talked about yet. I think I would like to organize a. You see, this is where the distance and the internet factor is different from a lot of the other work that I do. Like in my church work, I would get people in a room together. Mm-hmm. And I would facilitate a process, and because I have relationships with multiple of you, I would start to get that going, and that might happen. The difficulty when you start taking those steps, you already start to develop your hierarchy, because now we're going to have Job and Sam and Joey and Tyler and Warren and Vendonk and so now suddenly what we're doing is we're taking, because you can only do it with a certain number of individuals, because again, you've got the scale thing that happens with hierarchy. So now suddenly we have the rings are getting more defined, and we've already noticed some of those tensions in the Bridges of Meaning Discord, because part of the new playing around with Friday question and answer is let's give some other people a chance to be in the inner ring. So you get these inner ring dynamics already forming, and part of me would like to hold those dynamics off as long as possible, also because even though we've had now conversations on the Discord server, we've had conversations on Zoom, because we haven't had the face-to-face, person-to-person interactions, there's levels we don't know each other yet on.
Right. I mean, I've still never met you face-to-face.
No, I know.
We've spent a lot of time talking, but I've still never seen you. I don't even know how tall you are. I think you're tall, but I could be surprised either way.
Rumor has it. But and so that's my original plan was much more, we were going to do the West Coast tour. I'm going to get out to Chicago, going to do another retreat. Thunder Bay is going to happen. And you could see basically, so March was the retreat. September was the Thunder Bay. And I was really anticipating that Thunder Bay event was going to, so then you can really have an idea about who's really excited about this if they're going to get to Thunder Bay.
Yes.
It's kind of a sorting process. I mean, Warren's planning on coming to Thunder Bay whenever it happens, and I want you and Warren to meet, and because what I have a sense of is that there are more of you out there than you know, and I regularly get emails and correspondence from people who haven't written me before but have been watching for a while, and even a Discord server, as a mediums have bandwidths, and I think we have a pretty good idea now sort of what the Discord server can manage, which is why when Charlie starts the Outpost, who knows how many Discord servers we actually need in terms of those communities to flourish. So there's a lot going on here, but I agree with you that we ought to take advantage of this COVID pause and do some groundwork. Now, part of what I've been, and I've given Joey and Tyler some at Living Stones, one of the things that we've been working on is we've now got a package. So we've got a church app. So I don't really have that fully together. We have a new church website, but we also have some church administrative software. This church administrative software is really set for doing the kinds of things we're doing, because there's a fair amount of overlap in terms of churches and this kind of work. It involves communication. If we want to do a conference, it involves payment. I mean, all of this stuff. And so we've got some tools now that we can leverage, because Little Living Stones is worship service and some Bible studies and, some face-to-face diaconal work. That's what Living Stones is. That's all it is. It's a small church, but the software has a lot of potential that Living Stones is not going to take advantage of. And we can leverage some of that potential to start to build that program. And a lot of your ideas, I would like to see, I would like to see us do some of what, we see some of what Rebel Wisdom is doing, what Pangburn failed at. I would like to, some of the retreat stuff. And I think, because retreat is sort of, Rebel Wisdom does like men's stuff and Pangbird at the conferences. And I would like to see us develop that. And then the question is, okay, what are our next steps? And I am still, I like, for example, Warren in Australia has bunches of blokes, and you probably don't know anything about bunches of blokes.
I don't.
It's sort of an Australian, it's very estuary-like, but it's kind of a men's gathering thing. And it's sort of a Promise Keepers thing. It doesn't really have the elements of Promise Keepers, but it's that type of thing. And they want to bring bunch of blokes to America. And so he's like, well, I said, it's an estuary-like thing. So, there might be some, but I would rather not have one curriculum. So when I look at the woman and her mom's thing, nothing against that, but that's a good vehicle if Paul Vanderklay decides he wants to be, a celebrity estuary. And so we'll have little Paul Vanderklay meetups, and we'll have Paul Vanderklay groups, but the emphasis of, I'm not quite as narrow in terms of the mom thing. I'm a little too broad. That's part of the reason I don't want to do that. But I have thought of having monthly themes where I'll make 2 or 3 videos in a month on a particular thing. That can be a concentrated conversation piece. But part of the challenge that we face is that Jordan Peterson was so broad that under his banner, you had some men's movement type stuff.
Yeah.
Christianity stuff, psychology stuff, Jungian stuff. I mean, it was just
academic stuff. Yeah.
Academic stuff, philosophy, evolutionary psychology. I mean, it was just so broad. And that one of the things that I've noticed in helping to start different meetups different meetups have different concentrations depending on who the people are. Like our local Jordan Peterson meetup has a lot of conversations that single young men need to have. And so a big piece of our particular meetup is the fact that we have some younger guys and some older guys, and there's a fair amount of wisdom transmission. Now,
yeah, same in Chicago.
someone might look at my channel and maybe see some of that, and there was some of Jordan Peterson, but if we were to say what our Bridges of Meaning is about is, you know, basically wisdom development for young men. Well, now we've got a niche, and niches are powerful because, you know, it's concentrated and it's focused. But suddenly, you know, how many of the in the Discord would sort of be, that's not my niche.
That's not what I showed up here for.
That's not what I showed up here for. And this is sort of where someone should pause and come to an appreciation of the genius of the church. Because whereas if you do enough church shopping, and I'm sure you have, given your searches, your circumstance, you very quickly see that churches have specialities and interests and so on and so forth, but somehow in the church they cohere together. And so I'm reluctant to, you know, either make it the Paul Vanderklay Celebrity Corporation or a niche corporation, because if people are actually going to, part of the difficulty we have in our culture right now is there's so much speciality and specializations that people's lives get segmented. So now they're in the moms group, but then pretty soon, you know, what happens to those women when their moms go off to college? You know, wait till your kids go off to college and see what that does to your wife. You know, suddenly they're having an identity crisis because they were a mom. And suddenly the college kids are like, stop momming me. Stop momming me. If you don't stop momming me, you know, so, and so we've, at this point at least, managed to have a culture where we actually have a fair amount of diversity, and that diversity also holds interest better, because you don't get tired. Oh no, we're going to talk about, you know, this subject over here. So that's part of the dynamic of why, you know, we need to build a platform, but I don't want to build the Paul Vanderklay groups or
And that was, so part of my suggestion in my last video, I actually thought was a decently good one, that was sort of making perhaps a new YouTube channel, whether it's called The Estuary or whether it's called Bridges Over Estuaries or whatever, estuary bridges of meaning groups or whatever it is, whatever it's called, or something else, that was sort of like trying to be something like a central hub in this corner of the internet that wasn't tied to any particular one person, that perhaps had a rotating cast of hosts and curators that would like interview you and interview Peugeot and interview Bishop Barron and interview Mary Cohen and all of these people and make commentary videos on all of them, and then maybe serve some role in terms of making announcements and stuff like that for the things that are going on, where it was sort of basically just trying to summarize what it is that the average consumer viewer in this corner of the internet likes, and helping tie it all together and sort of like representing them, but not being the name of any particular person. It's sort of like, it's basically Randos United with more structure and more strategy and more organization, which is the theme of this thing. It's like, here's kind of what we're already doing. Let's just be a little bit better at it. Yeah. And so just sort of a slightly better version of Randos United.
And I think that's a great idea, and I'd love to see that happen. YouTube is an interesting place in terms of videos, and in terms of developing a following. It isn't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. Yeah, it's a great idea. I don't quite know how to pull it off
Right.
because you know, like you said, sort of sounds like Randos United, but
I'm not claiming too much creativity with any of these things. I'm just saying, here's what we're already doing. Let's just, you know, a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think part of this is, yeah, it's going to be, it's interesting to be. So tomorrow myself and Pajot and Vervaeke have a video scheduled where we're going to have a conversation together. I like your idea. I don't know if the timing is now.
Okay.
It's just, and I don't, because
I don't know either. Yeah.
I don't know either, because I suspect that if we tried to start such a thing now, we'd sort of get what we've already got. And so part of me wonders if, you know, and again, the second coming of Jordan Peterson. If Jordan comes back, boy, I could talk about that for a long time because I've thought a fair amount about it. It's just so hard to know. So I think right now what I would like to do is find a way for us to put, you know, because right now I have to wrap this up by 4-ish. So
Sure.
Right now Vendonk has sort of been, you know, it was Vendonk and Job that did the West Coast tour. And of course, Job, you know, some people want to see me, some people want to see Job. And it would be better if we had a bigger platform, more organization. We can, you know, and I was thinking probably another retreat at my sister's place. I was thinking, I was all, you know, part of what Rick and I here at Living Stones are said, we're putting a ton of work right now. When you look at the Discord question and answer stuff, that Rick and I are playing with things, and basically we're setting up equipment and stuff here at Living Stones so that we can put on a conference here and probably bring in some other YouTubers and do a 2 or 3 day conference. And at Living Stones, you know, that level would probably be 100 people, let's say. And, you know, now again, because of the software, we can do registration. I mean, we can do a lot of things, but this is obviously going to happen post-COVID. Sacramento's a nice place to fly into.
It's a little easier than Thunder Bay.
It's a little easier than Thunder Bay. So, and so, you know, but you're exactly right. If we had a bit more of a platform, we could begin to start putting things. It's hard to put things on calendars right now because of COVID, but at some point, probably, hopefully by December or the spring, we can start to put things on calendars and say, okay, we're going to hit these cities going up and down. And if we had more structure and organization, you're exactly right. It would be better if I could say to Rob, who's the pastor at Salem, Rob, here's a little bit more of a group. And so, you know, Rob's ducked his head into the estuary a few times, but pastors get busy because they have day jobs and families and all those things. And so you're exactly right. If we had a little bit more of a program, but again, the question is, basically, when I would go into a place to start a new meetup, it's all just facilitation skills. I go in with zero agenda. Now, that's deceptive because many of the people have been watching my channel, so they've been brought up to speed in terms of a conversation. So I sort of know where the conversation's going to go. But as I've done with the videos, okay, what's your story? And I sort of help people give little snippets of their story, because something fundamental in this that is, in my opinion, anti-celebrity has to be the valued stories of the individuals in the group.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another challenge in this, that part of me in this culture wants there to be an anti-celebrity aspect to it.
Yeah.
Where it's not the Paul show. And
you're not just a night with mooks. This isn't just the mook troop formulation exercise.
Right.
Yeah.
So I agree, and I'd like to find some new ways to develop this. And yeah, how I'm just, if you would say, Paul, you had to do this tomorrow, I could lay out, okay, we'll do this, because as a pastor working in denominations, working in organizations, there are certain ways that organizations tend to approach these things. And I've had experience with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my experience is there are ways to do it quickly, but there are always trade-offs with these ways. Okay, so now here's our board, or here are our stakeholders. Well, once we do that, now suddenly we've got other people on the fringe, and we've got an inner ring, we've got an outer ring. You've always got those things naturally, but that's part of the reason that it's been much more ad hoc. That, okay, Vendonk wants to do this, and Job's on board, and actually Vendonk has another organization that was actually paying for gas for the tour. And so there's been a lot of other things sort of behind the scenes that I've known. And there are resources that can be available to us, because there are some people kind of that have said to me, there can be some, there's interest in financial backing, but
yeah.
I don't want to make those asks until here's our plan. We're going to do a conference. These are the people we want at the conference. We're going to need this much seed money, but I don't think we're at that level yet. We've done a retreat. Probably next step is a conference here at Living Stones, just because I got the facility.
Right.
We got the volunteers in terms of the meetup. And this is also part of the reason that I say, you and Hank want to say, no, we're going to do, the first conference is going to be in Chicago. and I say, go for it. Say, we're going to get Vanderclay, and then put your list together. And, we're going to get these people, and we're going to do it in Chicago, and we can find a space, or we'll maybe have Paul help us find a space, but we'll get a space, and we're going to do a conference, and these are the dates. And, Joey and Tyler, you snooze, you lose, boys.
Yeah.
So, and it's that non-centralized dynamic that I also want to incentivize.
Right.
So,
and for this to work, it'll need to be the sort of thing where there aren't barriers for the volunteers to be able to contribute in the ways that they want to.
right.
But it's also the structure that affords them to be contributing to something.
Right.
Right. And gives them a mission and a role, right? That they can volunteer to sign up for. And
it is also the case, as many have said, there needs to be a financial aspect to this. At some point, whether it's a 501c3 or whether we, my bias has tended to be we run it. Some of this stuff is easy to run through a church because you've got certain advantages by virtue of how churches work money-wise in America. And it can legitimately be considered a ministry by a church to do this kind of thing. Living Stone struggles in terms of administrative volunteers, but it doesn't have to be Living Stones. It could be, Cross Point in Southern California is a large church. But if we decide to go the 501c3 aspect, that's okay too. It's just that when now we get our 501c3, now we have to have a board now. And part of it is that I listen to your vision. I listen to the vision of some of the others out there. There are some differences in these visions. And I don't want to waste a lot of time putting a bunch of you in the room and watching the expected spat over the the non-overlapping aspects of your visions and the priorities that a centralized thing would need to create. So part of me would say, let the Chicago Discord shame everybody else by just how good and smart and how much you're doing. You know, put the Sacramento meetup to shame. You know, and maybe 2-3 years from now, there'll be a clear, something will emerge that everyone around will say, we're going with them. They got their act together. They've got the culture right. They've got some language on this that actually works and is cohesive, and they've put together stakeholders and they're really going. I'd love to see that happen.
Okay, well, we'll do our best. Chicagoans are known for getting things done.
City of broad shoulders.
The city that works.
The city that works. And you Chicago guys, you got a lot of talent there. You got some entrepreneurial gifts. So I say put everyone to shame. And so, you know, hey, we're going to hire Vanderklay away from Living Stones. So, hey, go for it. You know, do what you can. So,
right.
Or maybe you find someone better than Vanderklay and you hire him or her. I'd say go for that too. So.
All right. Well,
we got a minute or two if you got any last words, Sam. I kind of hogged the end of it here.
Oh, well, you know, what I'm not trying to do is trying to put this in a bottle and sell it. But what I do just wish that there was just something a little bit easier to communicate about and to share. And that doesn't seem quite there yet. And I think we need to move in that direction.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, thank you, Sam. And yeah, we'll keep talking. And again, I'd like to, I mean, here's an irony. Thunder Bay wasn't on any of our radars, and they came up with and I was the third one to be invited, or the fourth actually, because there's a local professor of the local university there that's also going to be talking with us. But you know, they took the initiative and put something together, and you know, history favors the bold.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Sam. Good talking to you.
Good talking to you too.
We'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Just a Midwest metagelical, talking about God and life and other hypotheticals. No patriarch or any genitals are gonna stop the logos flowing theological. Amen, amen, amen. Amen, 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 amen. Oh, it's relation ontological, philosophy as well as lovely symbolology. 'Cause it's just you and me. We're fellowshipping and communing on the open sea. Amen, 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 amen. Sola Scriptura hagiography, the sacred dances and rejoices with the scrutiny. I'm just a Midwest metagelical, talking about God and life and other hypotheticals. Amen, amen. Talking about God and life and other hypotheticals. We're pointed up to New Jerusalem, but can't agree on where and how or if and when it be. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen, 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 amen. I'm just a Midwest evangelical, talking about God and life and other hypotheticals.